Call the meeting to order. This is the July 15, 2014 meeting of the Town Plan and Zoning Commission of the Town of Fairfield. We're here tonight for a continuation of the public hearing for 92-140 Bronson Road, zoning compliance and coastal site plan application of Garden Homes Management pertaining to a proposed 95-unit residential development pursuant to Section 830G of the Connecticut General Statutes. We had last left off with Attorney Green and I believe the traffic engineer who was speaking at the time. Attorney Green?
Good evening, Mr. Chairman. Once again, members of Mr. Chairman, members of the Commission, staff. My name is Joel Green, and I represent the Lower Bronson Neighborhood Alliance. As the Chairman had indicated when we concluded the last hearing, David Spear.
I'm sorry to interrupt. Could you just check that? It doesn't sound. It's on? Okay, good.
David Spear of DLS Traffic Engineering was speaking before the Commission, and I'm about to recall him. Before we do that, I understand that there were some documents filed by the applicant today with the Commission. I'm not sure.
For the record, John Fallon, pursuant to the understanding with the chair at the last meeting, we said that we would produce any additional documentation before the close of business yesterday. And it was submitted yesterday, I believe, by email to Mr. Green and to the Commission at about 4:15. And we do have extra copies if the Commission or Mr. Green needs them.
Right. I received by email, I believe, today, but your agreement to submit and to exchange was independent of that. So I don't have an issue. Is there an issue, Attorney?
Well, I'm not sure I was out of state until late this afternoon, and I didn't receive email. Well, it didn't go into my work email box till about 5:45 last evening, so I didn't see it till about noon today on the road. So I haven't had a chance to review the documents in detail. I don't know. I noticed when I scanned through the documents that there appeared to be a drawing. I don't know if that's a revision to the proposed site plan. Is that?
It's a drawing that will be the subject of testimony on rebuttal by Mr. Trinkus, and because we had made the agreement that any written documentation that we would intend to put in as a further exhibit, we would file by the close of business on Monday. It's included in that package, and its presence will be explained during his rebuttal. It is not a revision to the plan.
Was the packet filed?
I got 527 yesterday.
Can we lose the feedback? Thank you.
Sorry.
Came into my inbox sometime yesterday afternoon. I was not here yesterday, so I forwarded it to the Commission
11 o'clock.
Sometime this morning.
5:20. According to my email, we got it at 11 o'clock today.
I got it.
But the applicant sent it at 5:27 or so, according to, I don't know if that time's
Correct.
right.
And Mr. Green, we sent it to him at that time, too.
Okay. So, talk to me.
Well, I'm just noting that I am really unable to respond to that this evening, and depending on how the evening goes, I may ask for an opportunity to respond to it tomorrow evening to the extent that the hearing continues, which I think unfortunately appears to be likely. But I'll cross that bridge. I suppose we can all cross that bridge when we come to it.
Well, if I could just talk about that bridge for a second, because I feel badly for this commission.
Thank you.
This volunteer commission. I stood in the hallway last week with Mr. Green, with the chairman, and I said, understanding the time pressure that you're on, I wanted to see and hope that we could avoid this back and forth, tit for tat, and that therefore we should both agree that anything that we were planning to submit for any purpose in the continued hearing, we would submit by Monday. And it was very much to avoid this situation, because what you're going to end up with now, hey, everybody's entitled to a vacation, but I canceled a trip out of town that I was looking forward to tomorrow, out of state, with family and friends, because this was here. I'm not criticizing Joel for going on vacation, but I don't think that should hold this whole process hostage. The way this should work is that Mr. Green should finish his presentation tonight. The public should finish speaking. If there's time, I should close, and we should be done. But if there's not, we should finish this hearing tomorrow evening. And that doesn't mean that the agreement that we all had is voided. And I'm going to have to wait until tomorrow to get whatever Mr. Green wants to file in rebuttal to what I filed on Monday as promised last Thursday night. And then I'm going to be back here tomorrow night saying, I need till Thursday.
Yep, and I will also note that the submission of drawings could constitute new evidence.
That's why
Okay.
it was submitted on Monday.
You know?
Mr. Chairman,
I went to Mr. Green on Monday. That's the very purpose.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, I think,
Otherwise, most of what we received was legal argument and citation to authority, which I appreciate, by the way, and which I was looking forward to hearing Mr. Green's response.
Well, if
in candor.
if I may, Mr. Chairman, I think that Mr. Fallon may not have clearly understood our discussion, and frankly, it was my understanding that Mr. Fallon had indicated that he would be filing a legal memo yesterday by the close of business. I did not expect there to be other documents. I made it clear to Mr. Fallon that I was leaving town on Friday morning, which I did. This was Thursday night at 11:30, and I made it clear to him that I was cutting my vacation short to come back this evening, which I did, arriving late this afternoon. And it was his request, as I understood it, that if I was going to produce another report from an expert, that he asked that I provide it to him. Mr. Wendt was standing with us, not the chairman as I understand it. Mr. Wendt said that that was between us, and that there would not be any sort of rule by the commission on that, and that was between council. And I said to Mr. Fallon that I did not anticipate filing another expert report, which I don't intend to do, by the way. And all I am saying to the commission, just by way at this point, is that I'm not sure what it is that Mr. Fallon submitted yesterday. It looks like more than a legal memo by Mr. Fallon. And if we don't complete tonight, I would ask for an opportunity, or I may ask for an opportunity to respond. That's all. That's where I
It's
am.
up to the commission.
Well-
The only thing I wanted to just point out, though, to the commission is, and whatever you decide, obviously, you are in charge. There are maybe 2 or 3 pages of book drawings. And I just said those are things that are going to just be referred to by way of making a point when Mr. Trinkus does his final rebuttal. So it's not like I've given everybody 20 pages of drawings. I would think that if the issue is looking...
No, you've made the representation that it's demonstrative in nature, it's not an amendment to the plan.
Correct.
And I think that's sufficient.
Let's see how it
We'll have to see how this plays out. I'm sensitive to, as you know, I am, advance notice of, arguments and authority and paper and filings. But, it was filed yesterday. I got it today. I read it,
I got it today, and I haven't read it, so in any event, we can deal with it if and when there's an issue.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd now like to recall Mr. Spear.
For the record, my name is David Spear. Continuing my previous presentation, I have a couple items that were asked for at the last hearing. One is a resume. Okay. The other document I just submitted is the trip generation information for the mid-rise apartments. It's pages 386 and 387 of the IP Institute of Transportation Engineers Trip Generation Manual, 9th edition. And that was also requested at the last meeting. The only other item requested previously was the number of columns in the parking field. The parking field has 28 columns in the actual parking stalls. Just to clarify that question.
Say that again?
28 columns are in the parking field underneath the
28, right.
building.
Those are where the pillars are impeding to some extent the parking.
Yes, the parking stalls. I'd just like to continue my comments. I previously left off. I think we finished discussing the bypass area that was warranted, and the next issue is item number 6 in site access and safety, which basically describes an undesirable traffic pattern that's being created by the proposed drive right next to the I-95 ramp. The traffic heading towards the ramp is accelerating up the ramp, and the traffic coming into this driveway will be slowing to turn right, so that the differential in speed is a very undesirable traffic pattern that's being created here. It's not standard design practice to put a driveway in such close proximity to an entrance ramp. Next item is number 7, is the stacking of site traffic. The stacking of site traffic in the driveway, if you get more than 2 or 3 vehicles stacked in the site driveway, you're going to block access to the Kovacs property, which is currently using that right-of-way to get access in and out of their property.
Right, so we have a 20-foot wide road that's serving to access the facility with the shared access by Kovacs property. How many cars are anticipated to stack up in the typical, through the model, right?
I don't have that. I think the applicant has done the analysis with the queuing. The actual final stacking numbers, it really depends on the situation with the traffic on Bronson Road during the morning is going to be the most stacking when the majority of the traffic is exiting the site, and they're also trying to enter the 95 ramp at the same time, and that's when you're going to have to see the stacking at the site drive. I would expect you'd probably have 3 to 5 vehicles stacking in there. That you're not going to have 20 or 30 stacked in there, but you're going to have more than 1 or 2.
Would that come down to the area where the Kovacs driveway is?
Yes, their driveway is about 2 to 3 vehicles from Bronson Road. The vehicle stacking length is about 25 feet per vehicle, so 3 vehicles is 75 feet. So if you stack 3 vehicles in there, you'll see that you get into the you get into the Kovacs property access.
Yeah, you have a question? Commissioner Les.
Question. When you were talking about the columns before in the parking garage, the way it's laid out, do you see any issues that the columns are going to cause any problems for certain spots that we won't be able to use?
Well, there's one column at the north end of the property where you basically turn around between the underground parking and the surface parking, and in that location there's a column right there that impedes the making of that. It's essentially a U-turn maneuver, and that particular column creates an issue with a number of the design vehicles.
So how many spots do you think are going to be a problem with the columns? Wait, we go to Borders Bookstore, which you're not familiar with, which Fairfield Bookstore now. The columns in that parking garage makes it difficult to park on some of these spots. So the way the garage, you see it as laid out, or the structure's laid out, the columns are laid out. By looking at the site plan, how many parking spots can you see the count? Say, I see a problem with this many or that many, where we're going to have a problem parking.
Well, some of the columns affect 2 parking spaces. They affect the parking on either side of the column. But There's 28 columns. I would expect that not everybody is going to be impacted by the columns. These columns are little square-shaped items on the end of the parking stall on the site plan. And those will be impeded by some drivers will be able to park next to them and not go into the other space. Some drivers will, the smaller cars and the more proficient drivers, and if they back in, they're more likely to not have a problem with the column as much as they would if they come in frontwards. But I would say probably, roughly maybe a third of them might be an impact as far as losing parking spaces, so that you're maybe looking at 5 or 10 spaces that are going to be.
How many, I'm sorry, Scott?
5 or 10 spaces that are going to be impacted by those columns, and the fact that people are going to shy away from those and park into the adjacent spaces.
Okay, thank you.
The next
Commissioner,
topic.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but Commissioner Barrett.
Yeah, just while you're on, while you're on parking, I have 2 questions. Because I asked you last week about the number of spaces you believe were insufficient. You thought it should be 1.5 per unit, and they have 1.2. So that's the number. I just want to ask in your opinion as a professional traffic engineer, is the insufficient of the parking, is that an inconvenience, meaning it'll be tougher to find a spot, or is there truly a safety issue that you see there with insufficient parking in this development?
I think it's both. It's an inconvenience because you're going to have difficulty to find a parking space, and it's also a safety factor if you overflow onto Bronson Road where there's no parking and there's no room for parking. And with the traffic on Bronson Road, there's no space on the site for overflow parking. So if they in fact have a shortage, as we think they will, there's really no remedy on site for that.
So, right, I get, there's no remedy on site, meaning if you have normal situation where you have inadequate parking, people park on the street or park somewhere nearby, whether good or bad, around somebody else. Here, there's no legal or safe alternative to parking in the parking lot. Is that my understanding
They
correctly?
probably could park along the drives between the parking spaces. There's some 20-foot two-way drive sections, but
Yeah.
there's really very little space in there.
That would block the road, though.
That's not a safe.
They would have to park off the side of the drive. They would park in the landscaped area.
There's no safe alternative to
There's
parking
no
in the
good-
lot.
There's no good alternative parking available for the shortage that we think they have.
Yeah. And one of the lack of sidewalks, the same thing. You say in your letter is lack, and I'll let you get back to your points you're going to make, but you already made this one last time. I just had to think that you say, or maybe you haven't got to that point, no sidewalks are available on site for children or for residents to walk anywhere. Again, is that an inconvenience? Sidewalks are nice, or is there a safety issue with where they would have to walk if there's no sidewalk?
It creates vehicular pedestrian conflicts because basically the only place to walk is going to be in the drive, and you already have a limited space in those drives, so you're going to have to go around the pedestrians if they're walking in the drives. So,
Okay. So it's not just an inconvenience, it's not.
it's a safety issue with the pedestrians.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Spear.
I just have two topics left to talk about. One is internal circulation, and I think we've already talked about this somewhat, but we did look at the designed vehicles that may need to access the site. And basically, the passenger car can access the site fairly completely. They can get through the drives and through the parking areas and make it through the turnaround and come back out to the site. That's the only vehicle that really has full access to the site. The next vehicle is called an SU-30 design vehicle, which is a single unit 30-foot wheelbase truck, which is like your service vehicles, your FedEx trucks, your UPS trucks, or your sanitation trucks, those types of vehicles. And the SU-30 has difficulty getting in and out of the site. They need the full width of the site drive. So if there were, say they were coming into the site and there was somebody trying to exit the site at the same time, they wouldn't be able to fit into the site drive.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Jacobson has a question, and then I do.
I just have a question about moving vans and bigger delivery trucks. Where would they go? I mean,
They really don't have access to the site either. The moving van can get on the site, they can make it into the driveway, they take the full width of the driveway, and they use a good portion of Bronson Road to get into the site. But once they get on the site, there's no place for them to turn around. The bend by the railroad tracks uses, the moving truck would use both sides of the driveway. And on the northerly side where they have the U-turn to make the loop, they physically can't make that turn in the geometry that they provide. There's no way with the columns and the curving for a moving van truck to get through there. So the moving van would have to come up on one side or the other, and then they'd have to back out. There's really no way to turn it around. And that was one of the design vehicles, which I guess I'll skip that one since we just went through it. The other design vehicle, the WB40, is a wheelbase truck with a wheelbase of 40 feet, and that's similar to the articulated fire truck. And they basically have the same problem that a moving van would have. They can get into the site, they can get all the way to the north corner, but then they can't make the bend, and they can't turn around, and they have to back out. So those are basically the design vehicles. One thing I want to note is that in the documentation that was submitted between this hearing and last hearing, there was a table showing driveways, and that table shows, it's from the DOT Highway Design Manual.
Yes.
That table is used to address the design parameters for driveways intersecting state roads. But the interesting thing is they have three categories of driveways. There's the residential driveway, a minor commercial, and a major commercial driveway. And I don't know what the applicant is going to say, but my impression is that they're going to try to refer this site as a residential driveway.
Yeah, that's my understanding from the arguments that were made from the
I
filings.
spoke to DOT folks this afternoon, and I explained the situation with the 95-unit apartment building, and they said that's not a residential driveway, that's a minor commercial driveway, and it should be treated as such. That they would never allow
A minor commercial roadway?
minor commercial driveway.
Minor commercial.
Where does it change?
And it's in the table. The table from the,
Can you,
I
I'm
don't-
looking at a report from Branson Willis. It's page 13 of the submission, the supplement that they filed, the applicant filed. Speaks to the National Fire Protection Association's uniform fire code. Is that?
no, that's, if you bear with me for a minute, I have it
Yeah,
in my file.
Please,
I
please,
just grab it.
please.
Emails with them. It's huge.
Well, this was the 20-page one,
Yeah.
but that's not the one that's
Yeah. Okay. From DOT.
Yeah.
Their references, residential driveways, and these references minor commercial. Having spoken to DOT.
I'm trying to look at
Page 23.
the documents that they're citing to. Right.
Page 23 of the document that was put out yesterday.
That was put on.
Yesterday, in the
They've
email?
got the cover for the Highway Design Manual. Got it,
I don't recall seeing that.
the tree on it.
That was, all right, that's not the document that came in yesterday, I believe. That was one that came in by an email that the last two sections. Right.
22 is the last page.
Yeah, that's,
Well, in
but we're
any
not
case,
talking
it-
about the same
That
document.
came in on July 9th.
Right. You're referring to the cover page on that, the supplemental material submitted, July 9th?
I didn't print the cover page.
Just for the record, Madam Chair, is
Please.
page 23 of the supplemental material submitted July 9th. Recommended driveway design criteria, figure 11-8A.
I found it. Thank you. Does anyone else need more time to find it?
I just wanted to point that out I think in rebuttal, you're gonna get the impression that the current driveway is a residential drive, and due to the number of units and the apartment use, it's considered a minor commercial drive.
So that's,
The state considers it a minor commercial drive.
very good. And that is your opinion, is that the drive is properly categorized as a minor commercial, the middle column in
Yes.
the table.
And it being such, the SU, which is referring to the SU-30 vehicles, is the design vehicle, which is the same thing we used in my comments. And the WB-50 can physically make it into the site. That's also one of the criteria for the minor commercial drive.
Be a requirement that any proposal for a minor commercial driveway a W-50 could physically make a turn into that driveway. It
Yeah.
would have to be, right?
Yes.
And based upon your review, it's your opinion that a W-50 cannot physically make the turn?
They can physically get into the drive, but they'd have to use all of Bronson Road, both sides of Bronson Road and both sides of the driveway. And they can't turn around on the site, they'd have to back out. The site's really not designed to accommodate that size vehicle.
Okay. The second, just walk me through this then. The next line down says, none into opposing lanes of travel acceptable into lanes moving in same direction. However, consider providing a design so that there will be no encroachment. Does this proposal meet that requirement?
No, not for the WB-50. The SU-30 can get on the site, and they need to encroach on the driveway opposing traffic, but not the Bronson Road opposing traffic.
Okay, the next one is in driveway. It says use all of driveway width of one way. This is a two-way. No encroachment into driveway entrance or exit lane if two-way unless low-volume driveway. Does it meet that requirement, in your opinion?
You're looking at the second line?
Yes.
Yes, it does meet that for the SU-30, not for the WB-50.
Do the standards require that they meet for WB-50?
No, the WB-50 just physically has to
Get
be
in
able to
there?
get in and out of the site.
Commissioner Barretts?
Yeah, I'm struggling, Mr. Spear, with some semantics here. I'm hoping you could clear them up. When I look at a table such as this, which is submitted, they have the word residential there. And residential, to me, would start with a single-family residence. So this would be a driveway for a single-family residence or other residences. And now you're stating to us that minor commercial, that this would be classified as minor commercial because it serves 95 units. Do you know, or could you explain like what the difference is, what the cutoff are? I mean, this is obvious, this is a residential development by definition. I mean, they're going to put residences there, but why would this be classified as a minor commercial?
Because of the scale of development, the 95 units, I asked the same question to the DOT guy I spoke with, and he said that basically they would include as single-family residence or shared driveways, or up to 3 or 4 single-family homes sharing a driveway as a residential driveway. But when you get into a 4-story, 95-unit building, that's a commercial building, and it's a rental building, and it functions like a business, so that it's a commercial driveway.
Right, because the word driveway is used, but again, a lot of us have a driveway and it's there to service one resident. So is there some objective cutoff, like 95 is minor commercial, obviously a single-family home is residential? If it was like, just to try to get an idea, if it was 50 units, do you think it would be regarded as minor
Is there a
commercial?
definition somewhere that explains this?
I don't have one. I don't know if the DOT has one spelled out somewhere. A lot of their definitions are unwritten sort of rule of thumbs that they use. My impression is that if you had 8 to 10 homes, that's not a significant generator of traffic and a significant development from a traffic point of view, that would be considered a residential driveway. But if you had 50 homes or 95 apartments, then that would be considered a minor commercial use.
Somebody at the state
From a
DOT,
driveway point of view.
and you were told by the state DOT that this would be classified, they would classify this as minor commercial, and they're the one that actually publishes this highway design manual, right?
Yes.
And so, but just to take that one step further, based upon your experience and your investigation and your research, is it your opinion that the road is properly classified as a minor commercial driveway?
Yes.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
Next topic. Does anyone else have any questions? No. Okay, good. Please.
Okay,
continue.
just to move on, item number 9, I think we've already talked about the 28 columns which are impeding some of the parking spaces used. The other issue in number 9 is the 22-foot width between parking spaces. The aisle width is 22 feet.
Right.
I believe your regulations call for 24 feet. I did a little research on that. The ITE Traffic Engineering Handbook recommends 24 to 26-foot aisles for 9 by 18-foot designed spaces. So they recommend 24 as a minimum also. And the 22 feet is going to make it difficult to maneuver in and out of the spaces, and I think when you combine the 22 feet with the 28 columns, it's going to make it even more difficult to maneuver in and out of the spaces.
Before you get to the next section, the CONDOT-related issues, did you have a chance to see the Branson Willis memorandum dated July 14, which is yesterday? It starts on page 13 of the packet that we were all talking about before we got started.
I sort of skimmed over it. I thought it was more of a legal memorandum, and I'm not an attorney, so I didn't.
Sure. Well,
didn't,
it relates to some of these issues that we were just talking about in terms of classification of the road and what standards are actually applicable, or which standards have been adopted, which have not, which are merely persuasive, etc. And I just wanted to ask you about a couple of these. The first is the Connecticut, the National Fire Protection Association's Uniform Fire Code 2003 edition. I believe that's what we were talking about. They submitted it on July 9, 2014. The representation in this memo is that Connecticut adopted those standards. Are you familiar with that?
No, I'm not.
Okay. The next one is the 2008 edition and the 2012 edition of those. They make the representation that these have not been adopted and therefore are merely persuasive. Are you familiar with those? 2008, 2000? Okay.
No.
All right. So with regard to the 2003 edition that has been adopted in Connecticut, there are a couple of definitions that they put out, namely for driveway, road, and roadway. Are you familiar with those?
This is the fire,
Correct.
the NAFTA?
Yes.
No, we don't deal with those.
Okay. All right, very good, thank you.
Okay, the last item I had on the internal circulation was the access to the building, which I believe is addressed in one of the fire memos here. But there's no access to the south side of the building, and all of the parking and things are on the north side and underneath the building. If there were a fire in the building, there would be no direct fire access to the south side of the building. And I think you're going to hear some rebuttal on that. The CONDOT related issues, there's 3 issues that DOT had. I had them take a look at the plans. The CONDOT District 3 Maintenance Office should be contacted with regard to the non-access fencing that may be needed along the highway ramp and along the railroad right-of-way. That's a safety issue with pedestrians. If a pedestrian gets up onto the ramp or onto the railroad tracks, that's a major safety issue. And the state normally requires, in my experience, anytime you have a frontage along a non-access line or along railroad property, unless there's a physical barrier that would supersede putting a fence in, that would make it so that a pedestrian could not physically get onto the highway or onto the railroad tracks, they require a fence be put in for safety reasons.
There was a recommendation in the code enforcement minutes, number 18 from engineering, that the traffic report should be reviewed by the state DOT. Are you familiar with or aware of the applicant having their traffic plan, the report reviewed by state DOT?
Not to date. I haven't. There was no evidence of it from the people I spoke with. Although it's not a major traffic generator, so they don't have to go in through the OSTA guidelines. There's an administrative decision review process for projects over 100,000 square feet and over 200 parking spaces, which this one doesn't meet either of those criteria.
So there's a recommendation, in code enforcement that it be reviewed by state DOT. You're suggesting in different portions here that it be reviewed, but they don't have to?
To go through, they need to run it by the district office, who is in charge of maintenance and safety, and they will review the need for a fence, and they also would look at the drainage issues. If there's any drainage that comes from this property onto the state property or into the railroad tracks, they want analysis of the drainage, which would go through the district office. And the last comment I have is related to the right-of-way. The curb return for the driveway that they propose goes past the non-access line for the ramp for 95. And if you look on the site plan, you'll see that the radius goes around and beyond the non-access line. And that needs to be reviewed by the district and by the right-of-way office to determine whether or not they can cross the non-access line. If they can't cross the non-access line, they can't design the driveway the way they have it shown. And the radius would have to end before they get to the non-access line. And they don't physically have enough frontage to make the driveway the way they want it.
What bullet point is that?
It's here. CONDOT
Number 13.
Is there a code section or some authority that you have to cite to for the requirement that they need to go to CONDOT for these different issues?
No, I think normally they would be referred to conduct by the town process, that the town can condition, if they were to approve it or disapprove it, they can request that the DOT be asked to look at the plans.
Okay, so when you say the town, we're one body of the town. Conservation is another, right? I mean, there are different departments. I'm trying to understand how we fit in that whole process, right? So, is it...
Well, I think that the fact that you're aware of the issues makes it incumbent on the applicant to demonstrate that they've addressed these issues with the state, and that the state is in agreement with their application.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So those are my comments. I guess in summary, I think the real problem with this application is the density and the amount of development they're proposing on this small site. And because of the high density proposed, that limits the amount of space they have for parking, and it requires more parking. It limits the amount of space they have for sidewalks. It limits a lot of uses and development of the site, so that the overdevelopment of the site creates a lot of these safety problems and the issues that we've pointed out.
Right. Wow. The last sentence of your report says that, quote, "The traffic issues cannot be fully addressed by the applicant with the development as proposed." Do you believe that the development as proposed is unsafe?
I believe it is, yes.
And based upon your review and analysis, you're of the opinion that that there are no recommendations or alternatives that we can make within their plan to make it safe for the proposed development.
Not while maintaining the density they were asking for. If they were to retool the application and redesign and reduce the density, they could address a lot of the issues.
So in other words, if there were fewer number of units, then there would need to be fewer number of parking spaces, which would mean that they could have wider lanes, wider aisles, wider aisles, and so forth?
Exactly, yes.
Anyone else have any questions? No?
I may, Mr. Chairman, I just have some questions I'd like to pose to Mr. Spear, and the commission may have some questions following mine, if I may.
Please.
Mr. Spear, as you're aware, the aisles that are proposed between the parking areas, the actual aisles between the parking spaces are 22 feet wide. Are you familiar with that?
Yes.
And are you familiar with our town zoning regulations that provide for a minimum of 24 feet for that application between perpendicular 90-degree parking spaces?
Yes.
And is there some safety issue created where in our town there's been a general, I think, almost uniform compliance with 24-foot parking aisles? Is there an issue where in a single development you suddenly begin changing the width of the aisles to 22 feet? In other words, you reduce that clearance for drivers who are used to using other lots in Fairfield.
Well, the safety issue would be really related to the pedestrians in the parking field. When they park their car and walk to the doors, if you have the 22-foot width, you're going to have more backing, more maneuvering, more jockeying around, and the backing is really the safety issue because of the visibility of the person behind you.
And just so we're clear, it's your position, position that a moving van, for example, or a fire truck that enters the site on the driveway and is pulled along the building would have to back out of this site the entire length all the way in reverse to Bronson Road.
Yes, the turnaround right here is the weak link, and they physically can't make that maneuver. So once they get in here, they're stuck. They have to back out and back all the way out of the site.
What's the height? I saw on the plans that where's north on that?
North would be generally this end of the...
All right. So at the...
north, I'm sorry, north is
Where your hand
generally
is.
as it's...
Yeah, where your hand is.
So on the west side of the building, what is the clearance?
Well, in fact...
Vis-a-vis the right side?
In fact, on the drawings, and maybe what I can do is, I don't know if the applicant still has an elevation on board. All right, I have the drawings. I think it's important that the commission address at this point, so again, shortly. And I'm referring to the plans that were submitted by the applicant, by A. Hennessy Architects. And I'm referring to, and unfortunately, I only have them in black and white. But if you look at the last page, which is PED 3.0. The Commissioner Harrison, I apologize, but in fact, if the commission refers to
Mr. Green should use the microphone. Hold the mic.
if the commission looks at the proposed west elevation, and that is the view from the driveway approach. In other words, the viewpoint would be from this point of the site, looking at the site in this direction. As you approach it, basically, as you come off Bronson Road and come off the road onto the driveway, take the bend, and as you're approaching the structure, you would see the west elevation. And when you look at this portion of the structure that straddles the drive or the parking area, it shows an elevation, a clear height of 13 feet there, entering that portion, under that portion of the building. Unfortunately, on the other portion of the building, which is the return, here, the elevation shown is in part only 10 feet.
Meaning what? That
Meaning
when
whatever you pull in has to back out. It can't go around the building. is what you're
Meaning that whatever, well, as Mr. Spear had indicated, first of all, the turning radius at this end of the building is so tight, and with the columns here, that a larger vehicle couldn't make this turn anyway.
what
But-
size vehicle can make the turn?
An SU-30 vehicle is the biggest vehicle that could turn through there.
SU-30 could make the turn.
But they use the full width of the drive. They can't stay on their side of the road.
Okay, so they encroach on the other side, but they can make the turn radius-wise. But then is an SU-30 over 10 feet high?
I believe it's about 9 feet, 9.5.
9.5? All right.
I actually have a photo that I don't have for the commission of a UPS truck. That's a straight UPS delivery van, and the height was 10 feet 6.
Is that a 30?
Yes, it is.
And it's your representation that is 10 feet 6 inches?
Yes.
So basically what you're saying is you can make the turn, but it can't fit under the building.
It would be, based on the elevations shown on this opening, I would say that it could not, well, again, I'm not the expert, I'd leave it to.
Well, ask him.
So in terms of clearing the,
Well, they can't make the 10-foot clearance, but they can make the 13-foot.
But the return is in the back, and you're going in the 13-foot. You get to the radius, you make the turn, you come under the end of the building, and it's 10 feet, right?
Well,
Am I looking at this correctly or not?
I haven't studied the elevations, so I don't know exactly what the heights are.
Yeah.
Yeah, they only have a 10-foot clearance.
Let me ask you, what's the next classification above an SU 30?
WB 40.
Okay, now, what is a WB 40?
It's a tractor trailer with a wheelbase of 40 feet from the front axles to the rear axles.
And what's a fire
example.
truck?
An example.
Example. Is a fire
The
truck?
fire truck is, the articulated fire truck is very similar to the WB 40.
WD?
WB.
WB 40, okay. Thank you.
so once again, just to emphasize, a truck would have to back up all the way to Bronson Road. A moving van, for example, would have to back up all the way to Bronson Road to exit the site.
Yes.
But in any event, to enter the site, it could not enter the site and stay entirely in its lane of travel. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Therefore, a truck backing up would arguably, any truck that size would arguably stop all traffic entering or exiting the site.
Yes, they would have to have an exclusive use of the driveway to get in and out.
Now, I think you were asked at the last session of the commission, of this hearing regarding parking on Bronson Road. And in that regard, I'd like to show you a series of photographs. I believe you had testified that there is no parking on Bronson Road in that vicinity, but as a practical matter, parking is not possible. Is that correct?
Parking is not feasible on Bronson Road for safety considerations. The width does not have enough space for parking on the side of the street.
While it might not be feasible or really feasible or safe, it is possible. There's no signs that say you can't park there, correct?
It's possible at this time that I believe the no parking is understood, that people understand there's no parking on Bronson Road in this vicinity. But I believe if there suddenly started to be people parking on Bronson Road, that there would be no parking signs posted.
All right, Mr. Spear, I'm going to show you.
You need to use the microphone, Attorney Green.
I actually have some copies of this for the So, Mr. Spear, I'm going to show you a photograph, and you recognize that in the distance in the center of this document, you're approaching the proposed road or the existing old highway. Do you recognize that?
Yes.
And in fact, you had looked at that and had been at the site. And you can see that there's a small sidewalk on the left side of the photograph. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And in the distance, you see a red truck that appears to be coming out of a driveway or approaching, coming towards the position where the photographer is. You see that? And you see the next photograph, you can see the truck approaching, and as it's turning, it's actually in the opposite lane of Bronson Road. You see that? And you see the truck then is returning, it apparently has a trailer behind it, and it's returning to its lane. You see that photograph? And the next photograph, the truck is approaching the telephone pole, which I think is probably just to the south of the driveway, or the old highway. And you see the truck now has pulled over to the curb near that telephone pole. And do you also see there's a sport utility vehicle heading in a more or less northerly direction or towards the highway entrance ramp? And the next photograph, you can still see the SUV is heading north, and in the distance you can see a car approaching from behind the truck. Do you see that? And the next photograph is a click later. You can see that the cars seem to be converging. I'm sorry, the SUV in the car. And then in the next photograph, the approaching vehicle, the approaching sedan, or looks like a Honda or an Acura, is all the way in the opposite lane of traffic. And the SUV is on the entrance ramp for I-95. And the next photograph, the Honda or the sedan is now returning to its proper lane of traffic. And in the next photograph, someone has gotten out of the truck and is apparently crossing the road in front of the Kovacs property. Can you just comment on this series of photographs on what this demonstrates from a traffic safety standpoint for the commission?
Well, I think what this series of photos shows is that the unsafe nature of parking on Bronson Road. The truck with the trailer parked there, and it forced the southbound vehicle to go completely on the wrong side of the road. If the southbound vehicle hadn't stopped behind the truck as they did, there would have been a potential head-on collision here with the northbound vehicle. And so it clearly demonstrates the reason why there should be no parking and why we would expect no parking on Bronson Road.
And what about the impact of a parked car, for example, where, again, there are no parking signs and parking is not prohibited by regulation, apparently, or by imposition of the police commission? What is the impact of, for example, a truck or a car being parked where this truck is positioned on emergency vehicles trying to access this site? Or even moving vans or trucks or anything?
Well, they parked in one of the worst places on Bronson Road, as far as this site is concerned. I think if you were a moving van, a emergency vehicle, or even an SU-30 vehicle, you would have difficulty getting in and out of the drive, the old highway road or whatever you want to call it, the site drive, due to the proximity of the red truck with the trailer.
The entrance that you're speaking of to the proposed development is right where that white sign with the arrow is pointing, is that right?
Yes. The road you see behind the truck, I believe, is the entrance ramp to I-95.
Right. And where did these pictures come from?
Who took the photograph?
Yeah, when were they taken, you know?
Oh, they were taken last week by Mr. Shine, who appeared before the commission last week, but couldn't be here this evening.
Thank you.
And you had indicated that in terms of the parking and the safety issue, that it's your view that the 113 spaces is inadequate. Is that correct?
Yes. In my opinion, you're going to have an overflow of parking with respect to the number of spaces available.
And in fact, it was your recommendation, well, you're familiar with Fairfield zoning regulations on parking, is that correct?
Yes.
And the need for example, in a residential development, in certain zones, the need for 3 parking spaces per residential unit.
Yes.
And you spoke in terms of 1.5. There's a standard that you had identified of 1.5 spaces per unit.
Yes.
And, but it's your position that 1.2 spaces per unit as proposed is inadequate and unsafe.
Yes, it results in a parking field that would be fully parked, and there would be vehicles left over that couldn't find a space.
And when you suggested to the commission earlier this evening that cars would have to park on the side of the road, are you suggesting then that excess cars would have to then drive over the curb that's proposed for the driveway and park on grassy areas on the site?
That would be the only limited place where they could get some extra spaces in would be to park along those drives over the curb.
And so, safe parking though, on a recognized, or I'll call legal parking, in a parking lot or in a street that allows parking, or as a practical matter can accommodate parking, is far away from the site, is that correct?
That's correct.
And you view that as a safety issue where pedestrians would be walking in the road with a level of traffic that 95 units produces, is that correct?
That's correct.
Potentially with a commercial vehicle or a truck that's entering the site and taking up both lanes, or backing out of the site with pedestrians in the road, is that correct? That's a safety issue?
Yes, it's a vehicular pedestrian conflict.
And what is the minimum, in your view, as you stand here, based on your experience, based on your training, and your review of this site plan, what would you recommend, based on your expertise, as the minimum number of spaces that this commission should allow? And I guess what I'm asking is, below the zoning regulations, which require 3 spaces per unit, what would be the minimum safe number of parking spaces that you could recommend adopt?
Well, I think what I recommended in my comments, the 1.5 spaces per unit would be
143.
would be reasonable. I mean, you may want to round it up to 150 spaces, but you definitely would not want to go below 140. 143 is what you get when you multiply it out from 95 spaces,
And
95 units.
And as you formulate that opinion, I take it you've accounted for the requirements of this site in terms of 95 units, is that correct?
Yes.
And you heard the expert, or you may have reviewed the report of the expert for the applicant who talked about residents who are not home at times or aren't using their spaces. You're familiar with that idea and that notion?
Well, yeah, the peak parking demand is basically in the middle of the night when everybody's home and all their cars are sitting in the parking area. So the fact that people are not home at some times really is not relevant.
And does your 1.5 parking spaces per dwelling unit account for the fact that some of these units will be occupied by more than one individual?
Yes.
And does your opinion account for the fact that some of the units may be occupied by families, including 3 or 4 adults?
Yes, it does.
And does it account for the fact that this facility has a community room where there might be an event held by a resident and invites non-residents over who drive to the site and use parking spaces? Does it account for that?
No, it doesn't really account for a special event. A special event could exceed the parking demand of the 1.5 units per unit.
And does it account for the fact that some people have 2 cars?
It does include that.
And does it account for the fact that there's been a discussion of community access for certain waterfront features of the site? Does it account for that? For example, if public access were allowed, as the applicant suggested it might permit?
I think a few additional spaces would be appropriate for public access.
And does it account for the fact that people have guests who are overnight guests occasionally?
Yes.
And does it account for the fact that there are elderly who are also have been referenced by the applicant as living in the site, who may need support services such as daycare, such as 24-hour care and that sort of thing?
Yes, that's accounted for.
And so it's your testimony then that the minimum safe number of spaces, based on what the applicant has presented for this site, the minimum safe number of spaces that would reasonably accommodate the load of the site is 150 spaces.
150 would be reasonable if you have public access and the issues you just mentioned. The actual number is 143, but if you want to have a few spaces for public access, 150 would be a much better number to provide.
What about handicap spots? Designations. In your review of the plan, how many does the applicant propose for handicap accessible parking spaces?
Yeah, it looks like they have proposed only two handicap spaces.
2. So in your experience, is that a sufficient number of handicap spaces?
I think that meets the minimum required by the ADA, but you can always provide an additional space or two would be appropriate.
Right, but your understanding of standards or code for the ADA would be that 2 meets the requirements?
I think it would meet the requirements, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Now,
Commissioner Jacobson, do you have a
I was
part?
gonna ask one handicap.
Okay.
Mr. Spear, if I may, you had testified, I counted that there would be 55 spaces that would be impacted by virtue of the columns that are proposed. So I had asked you questions about this development and the 95 proposed units. Does your number take into account your testimony that some of these spaces would be what I would call impaired by virtue of the location of a column that reduces the required width? In other words, the requirement is that a space be 9 by 18 under our zoning regulations, and obviously if there's a column that divides 2 spaces, it reduces the effective width. And I counted 55 spaces that would be impacted. Does that existence of columns change your number at all, or in terms of safety and in terms of the number of spaces?
Well, there's 28 columns, and obviously the column is between 2 spaces, which gives you 55 or 56, and there's only one on one side of one column.
Correct.
But the columns are not factored into the recommended number of parking spaces that I put in. Those are the recommended 150 parking spaces, 143 are fully utilizable parking spaces without impacts from the columns.
And if I can just jump back, would you recommend where you have a situation where a moving van has to back out of the entire site, and where potentially cars could be entering the site and would then also have to back out of the site ahead of a moving van moving backwards, would you recommend to this commission that at any point they require that there be some sort of a traffic safety signal or something that would warn drivers coming in not to enter the site, where a fire truck, a moving van, or a vehicle that could not maneuver on the site, a car would have some warning that it should not enter the site because a fire truck trying to leave the site and potentially return back to a fire department or firehouse or to respond to another emergency might get out of the site?
Well, I wouldn't really recommend a signal on Bronson Road, but I would recommend that if you had a large vehicle with the access limitations that have to back out of the site, that they would need to bring a flagman to direct traffic and to assist them in backing out of the site.
And also, our Fairfield zoning regulations require in certain areas for commercial buildings, and not in residential zones, but ordinarily in commercial zones, that there be a loading space provided for larger vehicles that enter a site and have a space to stop on the site. I note on this site, and as I'm sure you've observed, there's no larger space on the entire site. And you're familiar with that, is that correct?
Yeah, there's no loading space or loading dock on the site.
So even if a FedEx truck or a UPS truck could circulate through the site, where would a FedEx truck or a larger vehicle safely park on this site? Is there any space that would accommodate them while they're entering the building to deliver a package or a washing machine or whatever's being delivered?
There's no space for that design vehicle. What they would probably do is pull up right next to the door and just park right in the aisle and block traffic.
Assuming they could get under and through the building.
Assuming they make it that far.
And in terms of larger vehicles for example, a fire truck or or moving van, if there were to be facilities created on the site to turn that vehicle around, what would a cul-de-sac, if this commission were to find that in order to provide safe access to this site for any variety of vehicles, what would the minimum size of a cul-de-sac or a turnaround facility be, in your opinion, on the site to accommodate that?
Well, it depends how you do it. If you wanted to be able to turn around without backing up, you would probably need a 50-foot radius or a 100-foot diameter cul-de-sac in order to turn around a large vehicle. The other option would be to create more of a hammerhead design where they could pull in to a slot designed for the size of the truck and back out and make a K-turn or a Y-turn, and that would turn them around.
And similarly, on access, were you present the other night when there was discussion of the recommendations by the town engineer? And one of her recommendations was to create a 50-foot wide right-of-way serving the site with a minimum 30-foot wide paved area travelway. In your opinion, would that create, if the commission were to adopt that requirement, would that create sort of the minimum safe access for the site?
Well, I think a 50-foot right-of-way is appropriate, but you wouldn't necessarily need 30 feet of pavement if you had sidewalks. If you put sidewalks within the right-of-way, you could probably get by with 26 feet or 25, 26 foot with the pavement. But I think not having sidewalks, if you wanted to have extra width for pedestrians, then the 30-foot width would be appropriate.
But the 30-foot width might also, in certain instances, accommodate some additional parking. Is that correct?
If there were people who needed overflow parking, they would tend to park on those 30-foot wide areas. The parking is the vehicle parked is about 6 feet wide. So if you parked on one side of the road, you'd still have 24 feet for passing in both directions.
And I guess my last question is, would your opinion on required parking on the site and the minimum number of spaces change if, for example, there were parking amenities available, such as a parking garage in the vicinity, on-street parking or metered parking, or an off-site parking lot in close vicinity for alternative parking arrangements?
Well, I think the design, the number of parking spaces on site at 143 to 150 would still be required or should be required even if there's other parking available. But the overflow parking would allow for special events or other items when there's more parking demand than the normal demand.
But there's no such facility available in this instance?
No.
I have no further questions. I don't know if the commission has additional questions.
Commissioner Francis?
Could you discuss the hammerhead, the width and length of the hammerhead turn would be required?
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you.
You said you could have a cul-de-sac with a 50-foot radius, or a hammerhead turn. Are there any dimensions recommended for that?
For the hammerhead turn?
Yep.
Well, the slot would have to be 50 feet deep and probably 10 feet wide for them to be able to physically pull into it. And I think you would need an additional width of probably 2 to 4 feet to allow the vehicle to maneuver when it backs out to do the hammerhead maneuver. So that would make it more like 50 feet by 15 feet.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Barrett?
I don't know if you're familiar with the Americans with Disabilities Act. Do you think, because we don't have the document in front of us, that 2 spaces is adequate for something with over, regardless if it's 113 or 140, is 2 spaces meet the ADA requirements for a size lot? For 95, it's actually by space. They do it by parking spaces, so. Are you familiar with that, those codes, those regulations?
I'm familiar with them, but I don't have them.
Okay. I don't think it does. I think it's more like
around
5 per
one
100, but I
think
don't
it's usually
know.
one per 40 spaces, but I'm not sure.
It varies by size of the lot. Like if you have a small lot, you still need one, and, if you have a little lot, two, but it goes up, I just wondered about if it does. I don't think it does, but I just didn't know if you
Yeah, I think that would be something that could be easily checked on, but I don't.
we could ask
have
the
exact
applicant on
number.
rebuttal then, maybe. Okay.
Yes. Oh, well. Anyone else? No? Very good. Thank you.
Thank you. I would, Mr. Chairman, if I may, I would next like to call Fire Chief Richard Felner.
Thank you.
Good evening.
Good evening. If you could just please state your name and...
Fire Chief Richard Felner.
Thank you. And occupation and who you feel you're...
I'm the fire chief in the town of Fairfield.
Thank you. It's not for me, it's for the record.
I understand. Don't worry about it.
Thank you very much.
Been here before.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, do you want me to go ahead? After reviewing the plans, my concern here is safety. That's strictly my concern. I see this very serious problem. My ladder rescue vehicle is 9 feet wide. If we use our stabilizer jacks to put on, because you have to use that when you're operating the apparatus, it comes out to 19 feet. Now, if other emergency vehicles get there first, for example, an ambulance should get there first, our rescue truck comes in second. To get the ambulance back out, we'd have to back a truck out, and we'd have to back the ambulance out. That's really unacceptable. To make that swing with our ladder truck is almost, I see it, as looking at the plan, is almost impossible. All right? And also, I think I didn't hear tonight if there's a snowstorm. What if we have a snowstorm? Where are they going to put that snow? And to get our trucks in there, it's just going to be impossible. Now, FedEx and UPS, they're around all the time. And I do see it as making a delivery, parking there, and sure enough, we get a medical call or smoke in a building or something like that. You're not going to get in there. Now, we also drop a line, and I know as layman this is hard for you to understand. We'll drop a line at the hydrant. There'll be an engine in there on the scene. We drop a line at the hydrant. That truck that's dropping a line will have to come in and back out. Well, it's a 5-inch hose, and you're not just going to back over a 5-inch hose. And that's the only way, that would be possible. Far as fighting a fire, which I've had this happen in my career, to get to the rear of that building, or the side of that building, is going to be a big problem. First of all, it's very close to the railroad tracks, and I'm not sending people back in there with ground ladders to fight that fire. So our only access would be to fight the fire from the front of the building, which is, it's just not the way we operate. So I see it a big problem. Can we turn around in there? There's no way. It's not going to happen. And I've seen it time and time again on different commercial buildings, condominiums, and so forth and so on. When there's inclement weather, you're just not going to get in there. Now, if the rescue truck is in there first and we get an ambulance call for a medical, heart attack, etc., all right, there's no way that ambulance is going to get around that truck. It's just going to be impossible. So these are all my concerns. I do see it very serious concerns, and I think we should look at that before something does happen. And again, my concern here tonight is safety for the firefighters and the residents. That's the main thing. Yes, sir.
Commissioner Alessi.
Chief, who is Derek Lundeen?
Derek Lundeen is one of my fire inspectors.
According to the code review minutes in number 3 under the fire department, he wrote driveway is 20-foot minimum. Requires a fire zone, no parking maintained for the whole length of the road. So it's your testimony here tonight that it should be wider than 20 feet?
Definitely, yes, sir.
Okay. And item number 4, he has minimum clearance is 13 feet underneath the building with no piping hanging down.
Right, such a sprinkler system, right.
Do you have a problem with what was just testified before with Attorney?
Yes, our apparatus, especially the ladder truck and the rescue truck, is almost 13 feet. So I wouldn't send a piece of apparatus underneath the building in any part of the building for an operation.
Okay.
Commissioner Barrett, then Commissioner Jacobson.
Chief Felner, I just want to make sure I understood one of your statements correctly. You go on a lot of calls to residences, not just for fires, but for medical emergencies.
It's medical, yes, sir. There's, I'll give you the numbers, 4,800 medical calls a year, and that's for everything.
Yep, and you guys respond as quick as you can and do.
Our average time is 3 to 5 minutes.
And do a fantastic job. I mean, absolutely.
Thank you.
No, but I think what you were saying before is if, in doing that job, if the fire department vehicle first responder gets there before the ambulance.
Yes, sir.
The ambulance may not be able to get by if there's injuries.
Definitely not. You'll have a piece of fire apparatus in there, all right? And if there's cars parked in there or a FedEx truck, he's just not going to get around, and you'll have to carry the patient out. And if there's any cars parked on Bronson Road, I don't see my ladder rescue truck making that swing, looking at the plans.
Okay. Thank you, Chief Felner.
So, then, based on that, do you believe that the proposal is unsafe? It's unsafe for the public, health, safety, and welfare?
For the safety and welfare, yes, of the residents and the emergency personnel, yes, I do think it's unsafe.
And is your opinion limited to the 20-foot width of the road as proposed, or other considerations? You follow my question?
Yes, I understand what you're saying. Yes, the width is a concern because I have to get emergency vehicles in there and we have to operate.
Yeah.
I mean, with hose lines, 5-inch lines, inch and 3/4 lines and everything else. And, you can't just put one fire apparatus in there. Now you have other people coming out, other firefighters. We have 3 men on a piece of apparatus. So they would have to park out in the street because you're not going to you have an engine in there and pull the other truck behind it. It'll be like a parade with 3 trucks lined up. And when we get a call for a condominium or anything like that, also the ambulance goes along with us. So actually in that driveway, you'd have 4 vehicles in there not knowing what the call is, and everyone would have to back out to get the apparatus in there, and our operation. And don't forget, when we're laying lines, you have to have room in the back of the apparatus to get that hose off.
Right.
We carry about 1,800 feet of hose on the truck.
Are you aware of any other residential facility of this size in Fairfield? Let's just start there.
We have some similar to that in the Southport area,
Right.
which we've had a serious fire in one of the condos there. And we did have trouble making access to the rear of the building, and that's where the fire started to spread.
So that was a safety factor.
Yes, sir, definitely.
Any other buildings that you can think of to analogize in terms of access, to the site?
Well, just shooting from the hip, yes, up in Stratfield. There's the condominiums up there by the ballpark in that area and by Stratfield School. We have the, up on Eastern Turnpike there, what's the name, Woodfield Village. We have places in there. And we've been in there, and we have little problems now and then up there. Believe me, I've been there, and it has happened, even when I was on the apparatus before I made chief.
How many units are up there?
On the scene, well, we send two. When the building fire comes in, we send the shift commander 2 engines and a ladder truck. So we had 3 pieces there. Now what we'll do not knowing what the situation is. A lot of them, we have to leave out on the road and say stage until we tell you to come in. It's a time factor, because sometimes you have to operate right away. The faster the better. Immediate response is what's important.
Yeah. So just to put this in perspective, I mean, a residential driveway is, 10 feet, 15 feet, maybe 20 feet wide. And, you don't have issues approaching the house, or a single family, because why? Because it's closer to the road? Is it the length of the driveway? Is it the width of the drive here? Is it the bend in the road?
Well, I think you're
Trying to
putting
pinpoint why,
yeah,
why
I
this
know
is
what
a
you're
problem.
saying. Now, you can't compare a resident, and stop me if I didn't understand you, with a condominium where you have 50 people compared to a family of 4 or 5 people. That makes a big difference. And a lot of times you have to look, if there is a fire, which has happened, you have to look where the source. It could be in a different apartment, but the fire started in another apartment and it went overhead. So has this happened? Yeah, definitely. I don't know how long you've been here, but take Heritage Square, for example. It went from one end of the building to the other.
Pat, you have a question?
Actually, you partly answered one of my questions, but I have concerns about the rear of the building. If you had to evacuate people from the rear of the building, which is a possibility, right? If there's
Definitely.
How would that work? I mean, because there's train tracks, there's
One of the concerns.
particularly handicapped people or disabled people.
It's one of the concerns, to sit here and say, oh yeah, we can take them out. I don't know. Personally, it's too close to the railroad tracks. There's overhead wires we have to deal with. There's trains going by, so you don't know. Yes, and the handicap is a concern, and we do get a lot of the handicaps in these buildings. And it is a concern to mine. It's just not going to happen. And if you pull the ladder rescue truck in there, don't forget, we have the aerial, but you also have to pull the ladders out from the rear of the apparatus. And that, they're 35 foot, 30 feet. So if that other engine coming in the second one to help with more personnel, they couldn't get close. They'd have to sit out in the street till we get that out.
I was just going to say, if you needed more than one ambulance, which also happened.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Yeah. At one of the condo fires, we had 3 ambulances.
Right. Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Just order of magnitude, if you had to back up an articulated truck over that long a distance, how long would that take?
I don't know again, we could have a snowstorm. We could have a night like tonight. Okay, we could have people, I just want to visit and drop something off. You could have a delivery truck. So I can't say it's going to take 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 5 minutes. Could take 10, 15 minutes. If it's a FedEx truck and he's in the house delivering.
No, I'm talking about an articulated fire truck, one of your
Fire
trucks.
truck?
Yeah.
Well, I don't have the luxury of having a flagman, but when you back the truck out, our SOPs, we do not back a piece of fire apparatus out with someone in the rear of the fire thing. So time-wise, I would say 5 to 10 minutes.
Wait, did you just say you do not back fire apparatus trucks up? No?
Someone has to be in the rear of that truck.
So you have to have someone standing on Bronson Road as a flagman?
Pardon me, sir?
So you would have to have someone standing on Bronson Road as a flagman?
Yes, that's an SOP.
SOP. Sorry, forgive me, I didn't understand.
Yes, no. We've
I
had
understand.
firemen injured and killed by the apparatus backing up, not knowing it's in there.
So would this 10-minute delay be significant if somebody were in an ambulance waiting to back up themselves? 10 minutes?
With the ambulance, you have to get the driver in, the people in, you need room there to treat the patient, to take the patient out of the house and everything else. You're talking a minimum of 5 minutes. I mean, you just don't jump in the truck or your ambulance and throw it in reverse and start backing out. You have patients in there. Anything that's life-threatening, we send a firefighter with the ambulance to the hospital. We don't leave that patient once we start treating. So that means, we have that other piece of apparatus with 2 men on it trying to get in. And then Bronson Road, it would look like a parade out there with the ambulance and the trucks.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Am I correct, Chairman, if I may pose a few questions.
Yep, I think we just have one or two more. Sure. I saw, hold on, I just need to find the,
Page 28.
thanks. Yeah. Now, there was a recommendation also that there be a fire zone. You looked at the plans, did you see a fire zone?
I know we talked about it, and to be honest with you, I would have to look at, where is it? After looking at the plans, to be honest with you, I don't believe I saw a fire zone. And let me tell you, the fire zone, we have more problems with fire zones because people just ignore it, because they're only running in to stop and shop for 5 minutes to pick up something. So,
Is there a certain length of road after which you, or there should be required a fire zone? Is it 15 foot, 20 foot, 30 foot? At what point in, when you get to a certain, is it, trying to understand.
the length of the road,
Yeah,
sir?
at what point do you have to require a fire zone in order for it to be safe?
You know, to answer you off the top of my head, no, I don't want to give you a false answer. I'd be
Okay.
shooting
That's
shooting
fair.
from the hip.
Fair enough. Thank you. Anyone else? Attorney Green. Thank you.
Now, I presume when you speak about a fire zone, you mean an unobstructed access and a place for your department to set up and to access the building.
Yes, that's strictly for emergency vehicles, including police cars. It could be a domestic fight or something. And we answer calls like that also, where people are hurt. So we're talking here this evening, and we don't even mention police cars, because when there's traffic that we have, police cars respond with us for traffic control. So we would also have a police car there. So.
And can you comment on how your concerns relate to the number of access routes to this site? For example, I take it that your comments are related to the fact that there's only a single access in and single access out of this site.
Right. That was one of the first things when I reviewed this. I said to Mr. Green that I would definitely like to see two means exits. One in, one out. And this only has one. And for the number of units in there, I feel, my personal professional opinion, that this is unacceptable on my end.
And it would be your recommendation that there be two access points to the site?
Definitely, yeah.
Can you just explain once again for the commission, if a fire alarm sounds on this site, if someone pulls a fire alarm on the site, if someone puts in a call to your department, can you just explain how this deployment works and at the bottom of Bronson Road, where the deployment comes from and how that is set up?
You mean if we got a call for there?
If an alarm goes off or if there's a call?
Okay. If an alarm goes off right away immediately, Engine 4, which is in Southport, a few miles away, would be first due company. Second due assisting company would be Engine 1 and ladder rescue out of headquarters. Shift commander, who's in charge of all the stations and personnel in Fairfield, would be responding from Jennings Road. That's what we would get. And then you have police responding also. And if it was an automatic alarm, they sort of head that way, not in an emergency status, is an ambulance, just in case, if there's smoke in a house or something like that.
But under any circumstances, how many pieces of equipment, upon receiving that call, how many pieces of equipment are headed to this site?
I would say 5 immediately.
And would it be fair to say that while that equipment is on site, no other vehicles of any kind can access or leave the site?
Oh, definitely not. No, they couldn't get out on the site, and people couldn't get in. Also, if you have relatives that hear, oh, there's a fire over there, or medical or something, they would be coming there, they couldn't get in. They'd have to park over on Bronson Road. And if we called additional apparatus, it would, it's tight there. It's by the entrance of the turnpike, and that's a tight area.
And in terms of responding to a call where there is any sort of event, be it a pot that catches fire or a smoke condition, can you tell the commission about how long that equipment would be, in your experience, would be on the site?
If there's a smoke condition, or if it's a fire, you're going to be there 2-3 hours. If it's a smoke condition, I would say almost a good hour there. And you have to remember, most of the dangers, I don't mean to start preaching here, fire, smoke is the one that really kills. It's not always fire, it's smoke. And that's why we stress smoke detectors. I sound like a salesman here, but that's what's important.
Little plug.
Did you hear Mr. Spear's testimony about the need, among the needs on the site, in addition to a wider driveway, would be a facility that would enable you to turn even your largest apparatus around on the site?
No, even if you went 25 feet, we couldn't turn it. We couldn't turn our ladder truck around.
But if there were, for example, as Mr. Spear indicated, a 100-foot turnaround or a hammerhead that addressed some of your conditions? That
address some of our conditions. This is why I was concerned about two means of egress. If it come in there and it had to get out of the way, they can just pull up and get out of the way.
And similarly, I know you were not here, but the town engineer had talked about creating an access. Among the options was creating a right-of-way that's 50 feet throughout to the site with a 30-foot travel way. Would that address some of your conditions?
It would address some of the concerns, yes, sir.
And this commission has been, as part of this application, driveway aisles, for example, that ordinarily would be required to be 24 feet wide between parking spaces. This applicant is proposing only 22 feet. As a matter of safety, would you urge this commission not to reduce from 24 feet down to 22 feet?
Definitely, my personal opinion, no, I would not.
And what about creating a fire lane along the building? For example, I'm showing you the 20-foot driveway. The 20-foot driveway here all along the north side of the building. I note that there is proposed parking in this entire area. What about creating, as a recommendation, that a fire lane be established in this vicinity?
Definitely there should be. I was surprised in this, and that's why I was hesitant when I answered you before that there wasn't a fire lane. And I really was.
I don't understand your answer. The question, I think, was whether those spaces there should be a fire lane adjacent to the building.
Oh, they could.
They could?
Yeah.
Is that your recommendation? You believe that it's unsafe without a fire lane?
I would say yes, but let me tell you something also. If they cut it down, UPS trucks, Federal Express trucks, and delivery trucks, they don't care if it's a fire lane or if it's not, because they're in and out. But that 5 or 10 minutes that they're there could create a problem. And I hope I answered your question.
Thank you.
And one more thing, Mark. I note that there's a proposed fire hydrant on the site. Can you comment on the location of the fire hydrant, on your concerns for deployment and for connecting to water and to address a fire?
Yeah, definitely. Usually we try to get fire hydrants within 500 to 1,000 feet. And there would be a fire hydrant, which we would recommend. I believe was also recommended on site. So if we had to use that, we'd also be hooking up to that fire hydrant there, which you can't put the truck, and stop me if I'm not being clear here, you can't put the fire apparatus right next to the hydrant. You have to have, at least 5 to 10 feet to hook that hose to the hydrant.
So where on the plan would a fire truck have to park in order to hook up to that hydrant?
The hydrant is here.
Yep.
Okay, where's the entrance? Okay, right here, right? Okay. Where he would hook up to that hydrant, as I see, he wouldn't even be bumping in. Is that correct? Correct. Where that fire hydrant is, that wouldn't even be up by the unit, the units itself.
I see. So he would pull up along the road in front of the building, and then he'd run the hose back to the hydrant. I gotcha.
Yeah, right.
Do you think that the placement of the hydrant is appropriate on the plan?
Yeah, again, looking at it, reviewing it, I'd have to look at it closer, but yeah, it would be,
Okay.
I personally would move it up a little bit, and if you had two means of egress, I would put it more in the middle of the site than where it is now, because you have to remember, when we have a long lay of fire hose, the 5-inch hose, we have to have an engine at the hydrant, especially if it's a low-pressure hydrant. We have to have an engine at the hydrant and an engine on the scene. That's what the fire hose is for, and that's what fire apparatus is for.
Chief, is one hydrant enough for a building that size?
Yeah, we could supply it with that. But I'd also probably be using a hydrant, which would be a mess, but we would do it on Bronson Road. And that's where we would have to, reverse lay. In other words, when I say reverse lay, if we had double access and that truck came in there, he can drop a line, go to the other hydrant, next engine in, would hook up.
So what you're saying is you're gonna have to drop a line on Bronson Road and drive the truck up the roadway?
Yeah. That's what we do, and then we send a truck to the hydrant.
Right.
I know, Chief, this is a picture that we offered earlier, put into the record earlier, that shows a hydrant. I think south down
Right
Bronson
here.
Road. Yeah.
Okay, where's the entrance? Okay. There's the hydrant on the same side of the street on Bronson Road. Now, you take that and drop that line in there, it's going to be pretty hard to make that swing into the, into the property.
Pretty hard, or?
Well, difficult. I shouldn't use the word hard, I mean, we got apparatus, and,
Yeah.
some of them are pretty large. And if there's a car or anything parked there, and you have to realize when we're responding, the sirens and lights are going, so that car, and this happens, pulls over to the curb. All right, so we would have to go around that vehicle to get in there. This happens a lot of times. And with my ladder truck, do I see, just reviewing the plans, that this would, we would do it. I mean, we've jumped curbs and over grass and everything else, which we don't like to do because you wind up losing an apparatus sometimes. I know it happened to me.
And can you just tell the commission the effect on the ability to access the site if there are hoses in the road, or if you do have to lay a second hose out to Bronson Road? Can any other vehicle access the site where the hose is?
I wouldn't send a vehicle over a 5-inch hose. You just don't drive over a pressurized 5-inch hose. I mean, it just doesn't happen. And plus, if you do that, you could, the hose would let go, and then we're in real trouble. But no, we don't allow vehicles to drive over our 5-inch, the line we lay from a hydrant.
I don't have any further questions for the chief, but one question: do you appear pursuant to a subpoena this evening?
Yes, I was subpoenaed here this evening.
You are?
Yes, sir.
Very good. Subpoenaed by Attorney Green?
Yes, Attorney Green.
Excellent.
That's why I'm here.
Could you just, for the record, give us some background, education experience, how long you've been, in what positions, a little
Okay,
bit?
I've been on the fire department for 54 years. I went on the fire department after I got discharged from the Marine Corps. I've been chief for 15 years, going on 16 years. I came up through the ranks. I was at wartime in the Fire Prevention Bureau many years ago, and I was a shift commander for about 30 years. I attended fire marshal school. I'm also a fire safety director in New York City in the Manhattan Division, certified by John Jay College. And I attended numerous other classes of training and other safety classes, along the way, numerous safety classes. And I'm also the emergency manager for the town of Fairfield.
Thank you.
Okay.
If I may, just a few more questions to piggyback on that. You're familiar with the concept of the authority having jurisdiction in terms of the fire code?
Yes, local fire marshal.
And the fire marshal works under your direction, is that correct?
Yes, he's certified fire marshal. I'm his supervisor, but the fire marshal is his own separate entity in his office, and he takes care of all plan reviews. We have 3 in the fire marshal's office. They answer to me, but more or less they know what they're doing a lot more than I do. I haven't been in that position in about 30 years, so, and the code changes every other year, believe me.
And you're familiar with the NFPA 1 provisions, requirements?
Basically, I won't say I'm an expert on it. I could look and read it.
You're familiar with the minimum minimum height clearance required of 13 feet 6 inches?
Yes, I am.
And you're familiar with the fact that, I don't know if you've seen the elevations, but you may have heard my questioning of Mr. Spear. You're familiar with the fact that the structure has clearance heights of 13 feet in some instances and 10 feet in some instances. You wouldn't have the commission deviate in any way from the minimum 13-foot 6 access.
Definitely not. 10 foot to me, in my professional opinion, is unacceptable. And the building is sprinklered, by the way, and also you have to consider getting into the sprinkler room to shut these sprinklers off. That could create a problem also, especially in the wintertime, because now you have ice going down the driveway and everything else.
And just so that, just for the commission under NFPA 1, the 2003 provisions, the 13-foot 6 requirement is in 18.2.2.5.1.1 of NFPA 1. And similarly, Section 18.2.2.4 provides multiple access roads, and it provides more than one fire department access road shall be provided where conditions make it reasonable to believe a single road could be impaired by vehicle congestion, etc. Do you believe that this is an instance where multiple access roads should be provided?
Yes, I do.
And that's as a matter of safety and minimum safety?
Definitely a safety factor.
And similarly, where there's a dead-end road under 18.2.2.5.4, dead-end fire department access roads in excess of 150 feet in length shall be provided with approved provisions for the turning around of fire apparatus. Would you agree that that's a recommendation this commission should adopt?
Yes, I do.
How long is the road here?
I don't know the precise length of the road, but I do know that it's many times 150 feet.
It is longer than 150 feet.
Correct.
Is that why the NFPA 1 requirements for 12-foot wide lane width in each direction is applicable? Because of the size of the facility and that the traffic may be congested?
Well, this has been a source of great thought, because I think that the NFPA, and I was struck by the chair's comments earlier, your questions to Mr. Spear, because
what I wanted to know.
I talked to the state as well on this, and there's a confusing array of codes and regulations that apply, and it appears, and I was struck also by the fact that the supplemental materials submitted by the applicant have the NFPA 1141 reference, but I believe that state law does not adopt to the NFPA 1141. But I noticed in the NFPA 1141, on the same page that the applicant had submitted, and let me just for the commission's reference. On page 16 of the materials that the applicant, the supplemental materials dated July 9th, on page 16 as they're indexed on the upper right, it was sort of interesting to me that the applicant was apparently relying on the number of households, 0 to 100, for number of access routes, relying on table 5.1.5.1A. But on the next page, it said roadways, and it referred on page 16, for example, it said roadways shall have a minimum clear width of 12 feet.
Correct.
for each lane of travel, excluding shoulders and parking. Now, I think that that may be, I'm not sure that that's adopted by Connecticut, and I think it may be almost advisory, because my understanding is that NFPA 1141 is not code definitive.
Well, the applicant actually makes that point very clear. It states that the 2003 regulations, NFPA 1, have been adopted by Connecticut.
Correct.
And the others, I quote, are merely informational and not binding.
Correct.
Okay?
Therefore,
That's why I was asking your traffic expert whether he was familiar with the different standards and which should, govern this application for safety purposes.
yes, and
And what I've heard several times is that a 20-foot width is not safe as proposed, but I keep asking why and what authority, and under what authority that statement is being made. And I'm getting conflicting citations, right?
Correct.
Because there are provisions that I've seen that require 12-foot width for two-lane traffic in each direction, which would be a 24-foot roadway.
correct.
But then there is a citation to another section which says that a 20-foot wide roadway is sufficient and adequate. Which is why I asked the chief probably about 20 minutes ago whether his testimony about safety was relative only to the width of the roadway, or if his concerns went beyond that to the length of the roadway and the bend in the roadway and the height of the the clearance and the turnaround and so forth. That's why I was asking him those questions, okay, was to drill into his opinion and whether it was limited to the width of the road. So if you or the chief or another one of your witnesses can shed some light on how we're supposed to interpret these standards, it would be great.
All right. Well, it seems to me, first of all, that under the NFPA 1 provisions, 2003 provisions, first of all, the authority having jurisdiction can impose stricter standards than contained in the code, and that's set forth in section 4.5.3 of the NFPA. I have the chief of police who has indicated that he acts in a supervisory capacity with the fire marshal and has suggested that regardless of what these standards provide, based on his experience and training, many years of experience and training, that the configuration of this site is unsafe. So I would refer to that standard first. Next, section 4.1.3.1.2.1 provides that buildings shall be designed, located, and constructed to provide reasonable access to the building for emergency responders. That's section 4.1.3.1.2.1 of the NFPA 1. You've had two witnesses who have testified that if a fire truck could access the site, it would be occupying both lanes of traffic entering the site. Both lanes of access, not just the incoming, but the incoming and the outcoming. And the chief did not sound completely confident that a fire truck, this largest truck, could enter the site on the pavement, but might have to jump the curb in certain instances. So I would suggest that this building may not be located to provide reasonable access. The chief also testified to the fact that there's parking spaces between the 22-foot aisle and the building, which would impact on the ability of, it does not provide unobstructed access to the building because the firemen would have to run between potentially parked cars next to the truck that is hooked onto a fire hydrant at the west end of the building.
Right. I mean, I believe that when I asked him where the truck needed to sit to connect to the hydrant, you identified the space on the north part of the property in the lane, the aisle between rows of parked cars, right? A 22-foot aisle?
As I understood the testimony, and Chief, I asked you to jump in as you see fit, a truck has to be proximate to the, one truck has to be proximate to the hydrant, as I understand it, to hook to the hydrant. and another truck could be connected to that truck, is that?
Yes, if we took a line on Bronson Road, if that truck is hooked up to this hydrant and there's sufficient pressure, we can operate, depending how intense the fire is.
But as I understood the testimony, correct me if I'm wrong, Chief, a truck would have to be located in the vicinity of this hydrant at this point on the site. And other trucks could be located on other portions of the site, but one truck is a pumper, or what kind of truck is
That would be an engine pumper.
An engine pumper would have to be located at the hydrant to draw water out of the hydrant, and that would supply other equipment on the site.
Yeah, definitely, that's what that's there for.
The other equipment to service the part of the building on the eastern side of the plan, that fire truck would be parked in an aisle, I believe, in between two rows of parked cars. Is
Correct.
that right?
And I would submit, and I would ask the chief to jump in again, that having an aisle of parked cars between the ladder truck that would potentially be parked alongside the building or to the east of where the pumper truck is, that having parked cars in a 22-foot wide aisle and parked cars on both sides would impair the ability of the responders to address
Well,
them.
that's what I'd like to understand from the
If we
chief.
had that engine hooked up to the hydrant, I wouldn't be able to get the ladder truck around it.
Well, you might be able to pull the ladder truck in first.
Pumper goes out first, you know.
Okay.
It all depends, you don't know what the situation is.
Okay.
You either say,
Fair,
or don't go in.
that's fair enough. I mean, that's why we're asking the questions.
Right.
And then once you get the ladder truck over to the eastern side of the property, can a ladder truck safely operate in a 22-foot wide aisle?
Well, it would be close because, as I said, if we take up, when we put our stabilizer jacks out, we're taking up between 19 and 20 feet to operate that truck. So you don't have much operating in there at all.
Do you think that the 22-foot aisle in that, as shown on the plan, is safe? And that's what we have to, that's,
No, I
you know.
understand where you're coming from, and, you know, for me to stand up here and say, it's safe, it's unsafe, it's safe, you know, we make things work if we have to. Would I like to see it larger than that? Yeah. Do I say it could be unsafe? By all means. Because we're going to be dragging hose around there, we're going to be dragging first aid equipment around there, we're going to be dragging tools around there. So if the ladder truck is there and the stabilizers are out, our jacks are out, you're going to have, what, 2 feet to work around that truck?
If you're bringing people out of the eastern side of the building there, would you be able to, you know, move a stretcher by?
It would be difficult. You only have 2 feet to operate.
Yeah, I'm sorry, you need to use the microphone. I'm sorry. Yeah, so if you...
Yeah, you'd only have about 2 feet to operate, you know. Would we do it? Well, you know, we're operating to just about do anything. We would get them out one way or the other. Do I say it's safe doing that? Definitely not, because I have to think of my emergency personnel also. And if the weather is inclement, believe me, we had many injuries slipping on ice, climbing over snowbanks, and if there was a snowstorm in a situation, well, you're asking now, and the jacks are out, and we only have a 2 feet, I believe that could be a problem, yes, sir. You also have to realize you'll have landscapers in there, too, doing landscaping, and they're not going to park out on Bronson Road and walk in.
Commissioner Barris?
Yeah, just one clarifying point for both of you, actually. Mr. Green, one thing you asked I didn't understand. You asked him if he was subpoenaed here. This is not a court of law. I assume you were just meaning that he's here because you asked him to be here to review this application?
No, I served a subpoena on the chief.
You served a physical subpoena on one?
Correct.
Okay.
To compel his appearance here.
So you compelled his appearance here?
I did.
Did you attend our July 8th meeting, Mr. Green?
I did.
Did you hear Mr. Alessi, when he was hearing some of the applicant's presentation, say that he'd like to hear from the fire department on this? Do you recall?
I do.
So this is, you know, in addition to a subpoena, this is something that, you know, from my hearing of the first night of this hearing, something that we wanted to hear anyway. So I guess I just was not clear about the subpoena word. I'm happy you were able to facilitate this, but...
Look, we're operating under some very strict legal principles here, and I appreciated the comment by Mr. Alessi, but I also recognize that we need to make a record in this case. I think that, and Mr. Wendt can confirm, I believe that he was in touch with the department, and I'm not sure where that dialogue went, but I had spoken with the chief in advance, and I told him as a courtesy, certainly, and he was very understanding of the notion that we need to create a record here. This is a very serious application. I think there's some very serious fire safety issues that are presented by this application, and he was very understanding when I explained to him that I had to have someone here, and I thought it was appropriate, and the chief was very gracious and understood my need to have him here.
Thank you. I don't know, Attorney Green, if I interrupted you, you were explaining some portions of the code.
Yes.
And I kind of got you a little bit off track there, and I apologize. I'd like to finish that up. I see that Attorney Fallon is interested in jumping in here about something. So why don't you finish that up, where you were going with that, and then I'd like to understand what your turn, you will, as soon as we're finished then, okay?
Section 4.4.3.1 of the code, and Section 4.4.3 of the NFPA 1 deals with means of egress, and 4.4.3.1 deals with unobstructed egress, and it says that in every occupied building or structure, means of egress from all parts of the building shall be maintained free and unobstructed. And I would suggest that with the conditions that have been described, including parking against the building and the proximity of the parking to the building, that there is not necessarily unobstructed egress for fire department personnel. And I think the chief has identified some conditions that could prevent egress from the building for responders going in, for residents coming out, and so forth, in the event of a fire emergency. Is that it?
Oh, definitely.
Section 14.1 and 14.11.1.1 talks about exit discharge areas, and it says that exit discharge areas must provide all occupants with safe access to a public way. And in this case, sole way out is also, and I believe the chief has testified that the sole access way is this 20-foot driveway, and it is the only available access way for emergency vehicles. There is apparently insufficient width for sidewalks on all or some portion of this road. And also, the other parts of the site are surrounded by water, by railroad tracks, by a highway ramp. So I would suggest that that further goes to the notion that this 20-foot driveway is the only access way in for emergency equipment, and that there's not, in fact, a clear, safe path for occupants to exit. And it refers to a public way. It refers to occupants having safe access to a public way. And I don't believe that's been provided. Section 3.3.87 defines fire department access road. It says the road or other means developed to allow access and operational setup for fire fighting and rescue apparatus. And once again, I referenced this earlier, Section 18.2.2.4 speaks to multiple access roads. And again, once again, it says more than one fire department access road shall be provided where conditions make it reasonable to believe a single road can be impaired by vehicle congestion. Mr. Spear has made that clear that that condition would exist for larger vehicles. I think the chief has echoed the notion that that condition would exist, and that would indicate that multiple access roads should be provided in this instance. Section 18.2.5.1.1 refers to fire department access roads, and once again, having an unobstructed width of not less than 20 feet and an obstructed vertical clearance of not less than 13 feet 6. And once again, that has not been provided on this site. And it says in 18.2.2.5.1.3 that vertical clearances or widths shall be increased when And at the end, it says, "not adequate to accommodate fire apparatus." The chief has indicated that he has significant concerns about the adequacy of the width of the road to accommodate his equipment on the site. Is that correct, Chief?
Correct.
And that would create a safety concern of yours?
Yes.
Turning radius is 18.2.2.5.3. The turning radius of a fire department access road shall be as approved by the authority having jurisdiction, and there is discretion given to the authority having jurisdiction. I believe the chief has testified that the radiuses are inadequate for vehicles to maneuver on the site. Section 18.2.2.5.4 deals with dead ends, and once again, we reference that, but just as we're at this juncture, dead-end fire department access roads in excess of 150 feet in length shall be provided with approved provisions for the turning around of fire apparatus. There is no such provision on this site. That is, once again, something that should be provided so your vehicles can maneuver as a matter of safety, once again. Is that correct?
Yes.
18.2.3.1.1 says the required width of a fire department access road shall not be obstructed in any manner, including the parking of vehicles. I think that there's an argument to be made that in this instance, this road could be obstructed by routine traffic of residents or others trying to access this site. And then there's a series of sections under NFPA 1141, which once again I tend to agree with the chair at this point are somewhat advisory, but I don't know. I'd be happy to submit something on that, or if you'd like, I can go through them. I'm happy to do it either way, or I could do it after at another point in my presentation.
That's up to you, frankly. You know, I'm not going to suggest to you how to do it. We've been sitting for a while. I know Mr. Fallon wants to ask some questions. We're getting on to 10 after 10. How much more do you have in your presentation?
Well, in my overall presentation?
Yeah.
I have two more witnesses that I can wrap up this evening, I believe, and then a summation.
Attorney Fallon?
I don't want to inconvenience the chief.
Neither do I.
So if you're thinking of breaking, I don't have a long period of time with the chief, so I could ask a question.
Yeah. No, let's do that. So that you're not standing here arguing while he's, biding his time. And Attorney Fallon is correct. We need to not carry the chief over any longer than necessary. So why don't you save your analysis of 1141 and Attorney Fallon. I don't have any more questions for the chief. Does anybody else? No? Anyone else? No? All right. So we'll let Attorney Fallon ask you some questions, and then you can go home and get some dinner.
Thank you very much, Chief. Good evening.
Hi, John.
First of all, thank you for your years of service.
Thank you.
Let me ask you something. I know you're here under subpoena this evening, but did you have opportunity to speak with Attorney Green before he actually issued the subpoena?
Very briefly, I looked at the plans.
When did he first contact the chief?
About a week ago. Week and a half.
What did he indicate to you when he first contacted you?
We were with the fire marshal, William Kessler, and he wanted me to look over the particular plans that he laid out for me, and I gave him how I felt, which I said tonight.
And other than the conversation that you had with Mr. Green, did anybody else, be they a town official or any other member of the public, contact you with regard to this application?
No, sir.
Did you have any contact from the zoning office with regard?
No, I have not.
Okay. Now, you're familiar with the code enforcement review process we have in town here, correct?
Pretty much so. I'm not the expert. I've been out of that field for a while.
And you know that what happens is before any application can be filed with the Planning and Zoning Commission, it has to be submitted to the zoning office who then sent it out to all the town departments for a review of the application, to get comment and feedback before the applicant filed. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And when was the first time, Chief, that you had an opportunity to review the code enforcement minutes with regard to this particular proposal?
I haven't, sir.
You haven't?
No, sir.
Okay, they're part of the record here, and they are page 27 of the applicant's application, and that was a code enforcement minutes of April 15th, 2014. And if I could just call your attention to the portion of the code minutes which appear on page 28 of the application, page 2 of the code minutes, that involves Mr. Lundine's now what is the rank of Mr. Lundine?
Lieutenant in the fire marshal's office.
He's a lieutenant in the fire marshal's office,
Yes, sir.
correct?
Yes, sir.
And have you ever seen his comments in the April 15th code review before?
No, I have not.
Okay, so you haven't had an opportunity to review those,
No, sir, I have not.
but the commission has them as part of their record, correct?
Yes.
And this was a code review, Chief, that was undertaken on April 15th. So that the record is clear, these plans were submitted in April of this year to your department, and there was a code enforcement review that occurred over 3 months ago.
Mm-hmm.
Now, are you also familiar with a gentleman by the name of Doug Harris, H-E-R-O-U-S?
No, I'm not.
Okay. Doug Harris is the project manager for Garden Homes Management. And I want to show you some email correspondence, which is contained at page 35 of the application and is part of this record. Have you ever seen these emails back and forth from Captain
I'm
Kettler?
sorry.
I didn't interrupt.
No,
Mr.
you didn't,
Green.
and that's why I'm going to ask Attorney Green why he's interrupting you.
Thank you.
I'm going to interrupt because I don't believe that Attorney Fallon is entitled to free and open cross-examination. If he has some questions about the project, he's free to ask.
No, I disagree. I disagree. He's entitled to ask the chief about the emails that have been happening. If the chief has seen them before and he has something to say about them, then that's fine. If the chief has never seen these emails before, then he obviously can't testify
And
about
so the
them.
record is clear, and Mr. Green knows this as sure as I know it's nighttime, because he's read Fuller back and forth before, and that is that there's an absolute right of cross-examination of witness
There's
in
no arguing
administrative
about this.
proceedings.
Attorney Green, please, just he's entitled to ask the chief his questions. If the chief has not seen these emails before, it's going to be very quick.
Well, I'm happy to do that, to move this along. I'm not going to concede that Attorney Fallon has free and wide
Fair enough. Attorney Fallon, will you grant Attorney Green a running objection to your questions in this regard?
He can run all evening for all I
Very good.
care. I think actually he has been, but that's another story. So have you ever seen these emails exchanged between Fire Marshal Kessler of your department and Mr. Harrow, who is the representative of Garden Homes?
No, sir, I haven't.
Well, the commission's aware of them because they're part of the record. Do you know how many times Chief Mr. Harrow met with Captain Kessler in January, February, and March of this year with regard to this specific project?
I think with the fire marshal that he met with is to do with the building being sprinklered, the proper exits and stuff like that.
Well, my question was, do you know, first of all, my first question was how many times they met?
I don't know how many times they met now.
On March 19, Mr. Harrow writes back to Fire Marshal Kessler, I appreciate you and your team's time in reviewing our project on Bronson Road on Monday. In follow-up to this meeting and our meeting last summer to discuss the project design, I would like to confirm the items that we reviewed. The access height of the building clearance...
Attorney Fallon, with all due respect, given my reaction to what just happened, these are of record.
All right,
And the chief has testified that he's never seen these before. He doesn't know how many times this person has met, these people met. The email from Mr. Harrow is self-serving, and it speaks for itself.
Well, it is not self-serving, Commissioner, because what it says, where the link is when you go back to Captain Kessler's response on March 24 The items as indicated below do accurately reflect our discussions concerning the proposed Bonjan Road project.
It's in the record. The chief's never seen the
Okay.
emails before.
Well, I just
All
hope the
you're doing is
commission-
reading from the record
Well,
into the record and creating
Right.
duplicates of what exists.
Well, I hope the commission is aware, and I want this record to be aware, that my client in March of this year, after repeated meetings with the fire marshal's office, exchanged these emails, which are part of your record, and then my client, on April 15th, went to the Planning and Zoning Department sanctioned code review and received...
What does that mean, sanctioned code review?
The planning, what it means is the Planning and Zoning Commission runs and sanctions the code review. And if I'm not making my point clear, let me make my point perfectly clear. That after going through that process as documented in this record with the fire marshal, after going through the code review in April, never a word from the fire department in any way supplementing its code review comments or the emails with Captain Kessler till this evening. I won't belabor it, but I think it speaks for itself.
You've made the argument.
Fine.
The chief has a different opinion, and he's expressed it this evening.
The chief has a different opinion, but the fire department has expressed an opinion consistently for 6 months. I don't want
And
to
I
argue
would
with you.
suggest that the code enforcement review is subject to further review and analysis, as is indicated in the code enforcement minutes, specifically things from engineering and police where it's subject to further study of the traffic study, et cetera, et cetera. So the notion that our hands are somehow now tied and we can't receive further testimony and opinions on the plan and whether it's safe or whether it should be studied or evaluated, I think is disingenuous.
Well, I think the chair's comments and my comments are now complete, and we'll let the record stand on this point for that. If I could ask the chief a few more comments. Chief, you mentioned that one of the situations that you were talking about here, that you've encountered over your years, similar problems at other condominiums. And you mentioned, and I just want to go over those again, you mentioned, I heard Woodfield Village. Then what are the condominiums where you're referring to where you experienced similar problems?
To give you a list right now, you know, you got them in Stratfield, you have them in Southport, you know, to give you the full list.
Okay, but...
And all of them were built years ago, well before,
All right, so the
you know,
problems...
I was involved in it.
Sorry. The problems you were discussing here tonight are not, in your experience, unique. You've confronted these issues before.
I was aware of these issues before, and as time went on, from experience, you learn by mistakes that were made to correct them, and that's why I got involved here.
You also mentioned that, and this is tragic if it's true, that with regard to the matter of backing, that people have been killed by backing up. Is that really, have we had incidents?
No, but the Bridgeport Fire Department has, and other fire departments that I am aware of.
Okay, but thank God we haven't had any such incidents in Fairfield.
No, we haven't had anyone killed, but we have accidents with slipping off of snowbanks and stuff like that, and going up against the truck. That's why we have an SOP. We do not move that apparatus unless someone's in behind it and he's visible to the driver.
And that's why we have the SOP, for safety purposes.
Yes, sir.
And it's a good thing, right, that the building is sprinklered? I know you mentioned about access to the sprinkling room in the winter, but are most condominiums that are in Fairfield, to the best of your knowledge, sprinkled? Most multi-family developments?
I don't know. The code has changed. Well, I believe anything above two stories has to be sprinklered.
Okay, but you don't know how many of the, off the top of your head, how common multifamily housing being sprinklered is at this point?
No. See, the old code didn't address a lot of this years ago. I'm talking about.
Okay. At the end of the day, and getting back to the discussion I had with the chairman, I guess I'll leave it with this. You basically said in your testimony that the fire marshal's office, quote, knows what they're doing, that they are up to date on the codes and so on and so forth.
Trained for this, yes, sir.
Right. But to belabor the chair's point, in this particular case, despite the review by the fire marshal that's part of this record, you're disagreeing with your fire marshal's office?
No, I'm not disagreeing with my fire marshal office. His main concern the sprinklered building, exits, exitway, fire hydrants, location on the property. That's his primary concern, all right? Then, when I look at the width, which I believe, I don't know if Bill was aware of that at the time when they have their board meeting, that's my concern.
But you haven't read the email exchange that I referred to?
No, no.
The chair indicated.
But mostly the fire marshal's concerned about the building itself, its construction, its exits, its
But you
emergency.
haven't read the email exchange between
There was,
Tom and Kessler?
no, there was no need for me to read that because I
No, you haven't
don't,
read it.
no.
Correct.
No, I think it's been made clear, yeah.
I don't think I have anything else, but if I could just have a minute, Mr.
Sure,
Chairman.
yeah. Thank you, Chief.
Okay, I hope I answered your questions to the best of my ability.
Mr. Fallon, Attorney Fallon, one minute here to gather his thoughts and then.
Okay.
The only thing, Chief, that my colleague pointed out, I just want to make sure, when I asked you if having the building sprinkler was a good thing, your answer, I guess, in my over-talking, you got a little garbled. You did say it was a good thing, correct?
Oh, by all means, I believe it has to be sprinklered, anything now over 2 stories. Bill, is it? Yeah, anything over 2 stories in Fairfield has to be sprinkled, and this is over 2 stories.
Okay.
And that's code, that's by law.
Thank you, Chief.
Okay, thank you, Jane. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Mr. Chairman, in terms of some of the sections of the NFPA and some of the other sections, I think I'm not going to be finished this evening, but I will submit a memo tomorrow with a list of the various sections of those.
I certainly can't stop you from doing that, but I'm sure I'm going to hear something from Attorney Fallon with regard
It
to
is what it is.
another submission.
It is what it is. It was what I was trying to avoid, and,
Sure.
you know, I can't tell Mr. Green, nor would I want to taint the record. But again, all I would ask is, if he's going to submit things, like we thought we all agreed to, for Monday night, if he could give me the courtesy
Yeah.
of seeing them by midday tomorrow, it might alleviate the need for me to come here now on Wednesday night, and we'll all start talking about our Thursday plans. So that's all I can ask. If he's going to submit this or any other documentation to the record, then as I gave him the courtesy, if he could submit those to me by noon, so at least I and my consultants have the opportunity, so we can stop taking up the time of this commission unnecessarily and say, well, we're ready to address it.
And I appreciate your sensitivity to the fact that this is a volunteer commission and so forth, but, you know, that's a point also that doesn't need to be belabored too much. You did do him the courtesy of getting the papers in when you said you would, and I appreciate that.
Mr. Chairman, if I may.
That further submission should be in at some point that gives him an opportunity to evaluate it and work with it so that we don't find ourselves in this situation again.
Mr.
We have a
Chairman.
timeline here. We have to decide this application by the 24th. We have a regular meeting on the 22nd, which is next Tuesday. We're not going to finish here tonight, which means that we will be back here, I don't know, tomorrow. We're going to have to take a couple-minute break and talk about the schedule. But perhaps it's tomorrow night, maybe it's Thursday night. We have to finish this at some point. We have to deliberate, we have to consider this record. This is a voluminous record now, and we need to be in a position to convene, you know, next Tuesday when this is on our agenda and be, you know, equipped to decide the matter. So at some point, we do need to wrap it up. So, you know, with all that having been said, let's take a 2-minute break, unless you have something
Just
you need to
briefly,
say.
Mr. Chairman, Attorney Fallon keeps making reference to an agreement, and I just want to be clear. Attorney Fallon asked me if I was going to produce another expert with a report, a written report, to provide it to him in advance. I had indicated once again that I didn't anticipate having an expert with a report. I don't have an expert with a report. He knew last Thursday night when we spoke that I was leaving town. I just got back.
Yep.
And if Attorney
I
Fallon...
understand your conception of the conversation. I understand Mr. Fallon's conception of the conversation. and I'm just trying to do the right thing.
And I agree, and if I may finish, I am aware of the time constraints. I'm very aware of the time constraints involved, and I'm aware of the inconvenience having returned from vacation for this hearing. And I hear a lot about that at home as well. However, to be clear, I am referring to sections of the NFPA
Yeah, I don't have a
and
problem.
the various sections. Attorney Fallon, who has apparently a fire specialist in his quarry of consultants in this case, and has free access to all of the same laws. I understand that he wants me to do his work and identify the sections of the law that he has full access to by noon tomorrow. And I'll do.
I think we're really, now we're just spinning
But
wheels.
having said that,
Okay.
we'll do our best.
Yeah, all right, well, let's take a couple-minute break. I think we need to talk about some time conditions.
Thank you.
I'll go.
Call the meeting back to order. Attorney Green?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
So what I understand from the break is that any written submissions that you have for our hearing and our continued hearing, which I'll get to in a second, you will file and circulate by 1 p.m. tomorrow.
That's correct.
Okay. Mr. Fallon, is that acceptable? Thank you very much. Yes. We are not finishing tonight, and given my comments before the break, we're going to try and schedule this as quickly as possible. Tomorrow evening, work for you, Mr. Fallon? Yes. Okay. Attorney Green?
Yes.
7 p.m. start a little bit earlier, so we'll have a little bit more time. Very good. So that we're all on the same page, you're going to have about 15 minutes left here to do whatever you can or would like to in that 15 minutes. You will be on at 7, and I would like for your presentation to be wrapped up, in a relatively short period of time, okay? I mean, I want you to do what you need to and what you have prepared, but at the same time, we need to start becoming succinct. So keep that in mind, please. Okay?
Certainly.
All right. After you're finished, could I please have a showing of hands from the members of the public who are not represented by Attorney Green or Attorney Braun or other organizations that have presented here at the public hearings? How many members of the public plan to speak after Attorney Green has concluded? Okay. So, Attorney Braun, you...
I wasn't going to speak, I was just going to add some number calculations. Can I just submit it into the record?
Yes. Any members of the public, I would like to tell you that your written submissions are appreciated, and if you make a written submission, it is considered by us. You do not need to feel compelled if you choose not to. Also speak if you make a written submission. We read everything and we do understand that. So we have about a dozen people or so that would like to speak. So in that context, we'll hear from them after Attorney Green is finished. And then we will turn to Attorney Fallon for rebuttal. We need to wrap this up tomorrow night. Okay?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. So with that, please continue. We will break tonight at 11 or whenever, a few minutes after that if you need to just wrap up what you're doing.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to call Harry Ackley. Captain Ackley, I'm wondering if you can briefly describe your experience with fire safety and emergency response.
I'm the former fire inspector of the town of Fairfield and retired fire marshal.
retired fire safety instructor for the Connecticut Community Colleges, and code enforcement instructor. I am presently a New York City Fire Safety Director member, and I oversee the Greater New York City Fire Safety regulations for the nursing home and healthcare industry, coordinating the activities of the federal government, the state of New York, and NFPA, and regulatory compliance.
NFPA, so you're involved with the NFPA?
I know NFPA very well, sir.
I'm sorry?
I know NFPA very well, sir.
Right, very good.
It depends on what edition, what edition, what section, what standard you're applying to.
Can you spell your last name for me? I'm sorry, I just...
Pardon me?
Okay, can you spell your last name for the record?
A-C-K-L-E-Y.
Thank you.
Senior.
If I may, I'd like to submit, in order to expedite this, I will submit a resume for
Thank you.
Mr. Atkins. How long were you the fire marshal of the town of Fairfield?
12 years.
And how long were you with the Fairfield Fire Department?
37. 1965 to 2000.
And can you just expand on your experience with fire safety, emergency access, and that those sort of qualifications as they pertain to this project?
My brief review, and I speak of, forgive me if I speak with a passion, but the subject is a passionate subject to me. The views that I looked at here, when you referenced NFPA 1, 3rd edition, 2012, in section 18, this is, to me, does not meet the requirements of that standard. And then when you're looking at the standards, you have to take, when you look at the code, you're going to, NFPA 1, you're going to look at the standards that are referenced and addendum in that standard, so it would take a little bit more going back into what additions they're looking at. And when you're talking about the AHJ, when you're talking about the NFPA code, it's Connecticut's Fire Prevention Code. The authority having jurisdiction is the state of Connecticut, State Fire Marshal's Office. They delineate that to the local fire marshal. When you go against this code, willfully, you can do it. And it requires a modification at the state level. I always submitted my modification and will contact the state and say, this is what we're doing. They might say verbally, you can go ahead and do it, or they might say they want something in writing. But when I start looking at the 13-foot clearances and the 20-foot clearances and stuff, and you're talking about the Fire Prevention Code, which is now the Bible, I'd be a little more careful about how I deviated from that. I concern myself about the heights, the widths, and I think what I want to do, a picture speaks 1,000 words. I'm going to give you a copy, you can pass this around. When you started talking about the clearances and the operating experiences, this driveway creates a bottleneck. And I chuckled over it because I was thinking about a Corona bottle. When you put the lime in it.
Very familiar with that.
Did you ever try to get the lime out or anything from behind the lime? Well,
just the beer
on the bottle. And anything that goes in first isn't going to be able to get out once the stuff starts coming in behind it. And if you're in there on an EMS call, the ambulance happens to get in, the fire trucks come in behind it, it's stuck. It's going to become a very manipulative situation, a strategy and tactic that we can adjust to and we can understand. Our tactics adjust to the things that we have now, that are existing. What you're doing is creating a problem. The existing problems we learn to deal with, but now you're addressing and you're creating a problem. So you have the choice. Do you want to create a Corona bottle? A fire truck comes in here, and Chief Felner did it very well. They come in here, and they're going to get stuck in here. I'll get to this in a second. When they get in here, they're stuck. I'll get into the fire sprinkler system and the fire hydrant and the laying in the hose lines in a minute. But I want you to see this picture. What you're looking here at,
you need to use the microphone, sir. No, you need to use the microphone because that's a record.
Okay.
Yeah.
Use the mic.
Okay.
And are these duplicate photos? Yeah, no, you do. Yeah. Are these duplicate photos?
What you're looking at here
Sir?
is, pardon me?
Are these duplicate photos?
I took that picture 6 hours ago.
Excellent. Are these duplicates? Is this a
Oh, are they
duplicate?
duplicates?
Yeah.
Yes. Exact same picture, taken 6 hours ago at the rear station two.
Excellent. Thank you. So pass
What
this
you're
around and
looking at
when
here
it's
is
finished
the
there,
ladder
Attorney
truck
Fallon needs to see it.
with its jacks extended, or the maintenance. This wasn't a planned photo. I just happened to be driving by and see the ladder truck. The ladder truck's spread out. The pad that it's sitting on is 20 feet 6 inches. The truck doesn't, with its jacks out, doesn't fit on the pad. You're talking about a driveway that's 20 feet wide. You put the jacks out, you're off the driveway. When you're talking about taking the fire hydrant, which I'll allude to in a second, the fire truck parked at the fire hydrant, feeding the sprinkler system, is going to take roughly the same lay. The hose going to the hydrant, the hose going to the sprinkler system. So this picture will basically give you a rough idea, and the pad will be your driveway.
So, okay. Can you share that with Attorney? Thank you, Attorney Green.
Okay, I'm back. Okay? When you take a look at this, the plot layout, the fire hydrant is here in the corner, where the driveway comes in and makes the swing. The fire department connection is opposite that hydrant. If the fire apparatus, the pumper, comes in and hooks into that hydrant, once he hooks in, anything going down to the back, into the dead-end corridor, you can't get down there. You're done. Standard operating procedures of fire department. The first or second engine is going to take that hydrant, depending on the SOPs for the property. So once that is taken, or they'll have to hold back on it, you can't get down there. Or you can't get out until after you disconnect and you break down. The second thought, when you start talking about the fire department hookup, is this a dead-end water main? From a fire strategy standpoint, a tactician in fire safety would try not to take the fire hydrant on a dead-end main that's feeding a sprinkler system. Because once you do that, you're going to take the water from the sprinkler system. So if the sprinkler system is effectively working on the fire, and you hook into the hydrant, and you start sucking the water out, you're going to decrease the effectiveness of the sprinkler system.
Is the water line here serving both the hydrant as well as the sprinkler system?
Correct. So what would, if you had a significant fire, you would probably, the instructions for the pumper that was going to take the fire hydrant would be to come in from the hydrant on Bronson Road, where you have 2 feeds coming in, and you can't deviate from the water flow. When he lays in that driveway's dead. It's done. Like Chief Felner so eloquently said, you're not going to get over that 5-inch hose. Anything in the driveway is stuck, and nothing is going to get back down there. So that creates another problem from the strategy standpoint, and that concerned me. That was one of the first points I brought up. Plus, you're looking at the length of the dead end and the turning radius. You get a truck down in here, you're not going to turn it. You're going to have to back it all the way out, and we have a very strong, adamant policy. We don't want to back the trucks up. We have to, okay, but we don't try to get ourselves in that position. This is a dead-end main, a dead-end road, no matter how you look at it. It's going to create a problem. You're going to create a problem anytime you go in there to hook up that ladder truck, and you got the picture. You're 20 feet, you're going to put the jacks down. When you talked about fire lane access, fire lane really isn't used anymore. It's fire access road or fire access to the building. Fire access or fire zone is an unobstructed access to the structure. The parking area in the front of the building is an obstruction.
The parking area in front of the building is an obstruction to the
cars
fire
coming
safety.
in
Yeah.
to the building. It's an obstruction to the front of the building. You already have enough obstructions, and now you've created more of them.
Well, that was my question for the chief, was the 22-foot wide aisle in front of the building there, is that enough for a fire truck to come in and park and service, you know, the eastern side of the building?
Look at the picture. You figure you got a 20-foot road, you got 2 cars parked here. that truck comes in here, tries to put out his jack, it's gonna be banging into the trucks. Now, you're not gonna be able to get around those jacks either, and that hose that easily. You're not gonna be, you don't have the maneuverability of the area. So you're really stuffing yourself into a corner. You're pinning yourself into a corner with this. And anything that goes in there is gonna have to take some very serious standpoint. And going into this, yes, we do have areas in town that are like this. There are areas that have been, they're existing conditions. We're creating a condition here that could be prevented. And that's what we're here for, to try to prevent a serious situation. And just picture the point, if you have somebody in there and the ambulance gets in there, the fire truck comes in behind it, the police car comes in behind it, they gotta get the ambulance out. They gotta back all the apparatus and stuff out of the way. And if you look at the buses, the trucks, the ambulances, they're higher than 13 feet, some of them. So, and that doesn't turn around, they don't turn around that easy either. You might be able to turn the ambulance around, but you still got to get by the fire truck that's coming in. And you can get a fire pumper, you can get the rescue, or you get the ladder truck, depending on what the nature of the call is, coming in there to block that up. You get a problem. You got a big problem. And I can take it on from a water flow standpoint and a fire standpoint, but the big thing is you got a Corona bottle with a big line right in the middle of it, and it's going to stop everything. And you don't have more than 20 feet. And you can't operate on a 20-foot pathway. And the picture's self-explanatory. 20 feet, 6 inches. And a ladder truck doesn't work on it. And it can't turn in there. Questions?
Do we have any questions? My question has to do with 20 feet in the regulations, in the, there's a...
I always look at those regulations and
NFPA
figures as minimum requirements.
Minimum, yeah, minimum. Well, at some point, I asked this of somebody, I can't remember who, and I don't remember getting an answer. Speaks to the NFPA 1 and the width of 20 feet on the one hand, and another section of the NFPA 1 that says minimum of 12 foot in each direction for a minimum width of 24 feet. Can you tell me what the difference is and which applies in which situation and what should be applied to this proposal?
Which one of those are by the interpretation of the authority having jurisdiction, and what section and standard addition he was looking at? If I was going to apply this, I would look for 50 feet, 40 foot, minimum 40 foot roadway. Chief Felner mentioned...
Minimum 40 foot?
You're going to have a car parked on each side of the road. You got snowstorm and all this debris going along. You're looking at 20 foot. If you put 10 feet each side of the 20 foot, how much you got?
Yeah, that'd be a total of 40. So you're suggesting a...
You asked me what I would recommend. I would say 40. If I came up with 35,
Well, actually, I
I'd be
didn't.
going...
I asked you about the regulations because you said that you were very familiar with the NFPA, and I certainly will get to your recommendation because that's I want to hear what that is as well. But Attorney Green,
I just want to, just to be clear, and just so that, and I think we're saying the same thing, Mr. Chairman, but it says not less than 20 feet. Is
right.
What it says. It doesn't say shall be 20 feet. And I believe what Mr. Ackley is suggesting is that 20 feet in this instance is completely inadequate. And we're also in a situation where we are under an 8-30G. It's being suggested that we not apply that sort of town road standards and that sort of thing.
No, that's right. That's
I
right.
believe the witness is testifying that his opinion is that 40 feet would be the appropriate width of the traffic for paving.
I think you're right. My first question was with regard to the NFPA and the difference between the 20-foot code as being a minimum, and then the other section which speaks to a 12-foot minimum in either direction for a total of 24-foot width. What I'm trying to understand is I don't even need to know which scenario each one of those gets applied to. I want to know that for this proposal, which of those standards is the appropriate one to apply? Should we be
The
looking
standard
at
is
a
a
minimum of 20, and then what's your recommendation, or a minimum of 24, and then what's your recommendation?
The recommendation is you're going to go with the standard, which is the NFPA 1, which is the Fire Safety Code, which is a statute which says a minimum, which refers to the 20-foot guideline.
Okay.
That's the 20-foot.
All right.
But then it opens it up to jurisdiction.
Right. And then upon your review of this plan, it's your opinion that the proposal, as it's written, is unsafe for all the reasons that you just described?
Correct. And I
And-
would take this picture and take it in thought when you start
Right.
talking about the
And,
reality.
and as a result of your review, it would be your recommendation for it to be safe, it would have to have a 20-foot wide roadway with 10 feet on either side for a total paved surface of 40 feet in width.
In the real world, yes, because you're going to have parking along that road at some point in time. You're going to have snow load along the side of the road. You're going to be, like Chief Felner said, you're going to have the lawn care people, the trucks parked on the side. You may have a UPS truck. And you also have the railroad right-of-way. They may have trucks parked in there. Think about if the railroad is working there and brings in their apparatus and they're working on those tracks and they got those trucks in that driveway, what's it going to do for your access? And what is the control factor? Because that's one of the questions I asked Attorney Green. Well, what's happening with the railroad right-of-way? Because they have total access, priority access to that property. And they're going to come in that same corner, they're going to park their equipment there. Now what are you going to do? So you got a mail truck, got a UPS truck, got the railroad, and anybody else, plus the snow load or anything else that's on the side of the road. That's why I said, at my thing, I would look at the 40-foot, 50-foot thing. If you want to be able to put cars on. And you can't tell me that when you have your clubhouse and you have your residents are entertaining, that somebody is not going to be parked along this roadway. And if you're having a graduation party or a bar mitzvah or christening, you're going to have a lot of people there. They're going to be parking there. It's a community room, or clubhouse, sorry, community room, excuse me. Sorry, in your community room. You're going to be entertaining, and people are going to be there. They're going to have to park there, because there's not that kind of parking space, and there's no place for you to go.
Thank you.
And there'll be double parking down here in the parking lot.
Just distracting. I think what the chairman, one of his questions was, and I think you responded, that NFPA 1, 2003 provisions, certain of them apply to this proposal, but I think the chairman was also, and please correct me, is, for example, there are some requirements or some prescribed limits in NFPA 1141. And I understand, and I think we've talked tonight about them not being necessarily code, but are they advisory? Do they provide a guide to this commission in terms of interpreting this application?
Their guide,
They provide, for
their
example,
guidelines, their guidelines. And I'll go back to what edition, again, is it? Because the editions are updated. The section you were talking about, the 12-foot section, might not have been updated since the new code came out.
Well, for example, and you're not familiar with this, there was a submission by the applicant that had the 2008 NFPA 1141 in it, but since that time, I understand there's been a 2012 published and that sort of thing. So that, do those provide, would it be fair to say they provide guidance to the commission?
They provide you the guidance when you get into the code and regulation of this thing, which code is in effect at the time that this plan is being approved. And that's the 2012, correct? Or 2013?
And finally, could you just briefly, and I understand it's 5 after 11, but can you just address the effect of these parking spaces that are located on the north side of the building, outside of the, I guess on the south side of the north driveway, if I may, that are up against the building, pointing to
Those are the ones that we're talking about. They're going to start to present an obstruction to any access to the building. And when you start taking the ladder truck or the pumpers and start dragging your hose off, you're gonna have the cars parked there, and you're not gonna have the room. If you take a look at that picture, 20 feet, short distance. These vehicles here, the backs of these vehicles, and the vehicles are gonna create obstructions that you're gonna have to get around for.
And is it your view, and you've discussed this bottleneck, and you've discussed the inadequacy of the width of the driveways, this, once again, the location of these parking spaces, that they present real public safety issues?
Yes, they do.
And concerns?
They provide a public safety access issue.
Very good. Are you,
I have nothing further.
okay, very good. I would love to finish up with this witness tonight. You can.
I would like to say, Mr. Acton, if you're backing up.
Yes, please.
Thank you. Mr. Ackley?
Yes, sir.
Did you use the microphone to finish your?
Yeah.
Yes, sir, yes, sir.
Harry, a couple of quick questions for you. That picture, which the commission has, I just want to understand it. How wide is the truck?
Well, you're looking at the truck, it's sitting on a 20-foot, 6-inch pad. And the truck is roughly, I'd say, 19 feet wide.
Okay.
And the truck itself is about 9 feet wide, and then you're adding on.
So the stabilizers, from one stabilizer to the other, how wide are we talking here? Using
say
that?
19 feet.
19 feet, okay.
I'll get 18, between 18 and 19 feet.
Okay, so the problems you describe at 20 feet, you'd still have those problems at 24 feet, wouldn't you?
Correct.
Okay. You reference, well, let's talk about quickly, and I don't want to belabor this because everybody's getting a headache here. This is NFPA 1
National Fire
2003.
Prevention Code.
And as I understand it, this is the code that was and is adopted by the state. The other advisory, but this is the code, correct?
But when you're reading the code,
Yeah.
the first thing you look at, when you look at the code, you go to the referenced
Okay.
standards.
Go ahead.
And find out which ones are in there, and then you
Right.
take the issue that you're talking about
Right.
to the standard that applies to it,
All right.
and the addition that they're referencing in the code.
Well, let's do that with this document. And this is all part of the commission's record. It's part of the July 9th submission, page 9. Page 10, 18.2.251, and I quote, "Fire department access roads shall have an unobstructed width of not less than 20 feet, 6.1 millimeters, and an unobstructed vertical clearance of not less than 13 feet, 6 inches." That's the minimal standard under the code, correct? So although it may not be the optimal standard, at least according to this code, it establishes a minimal standard for safety, correct?
Correct.
Under the state of Connecticut. Okay. And are you aware that Fire Marshal Kessler did, and it's part of the record, and I won't read it, he opined that the 20 feet would in fact establish the minimal required access, and his department, the Fire Marshal's department, your former department, approved it. Were you aware of that?
Yes.
Okay. Last question I have for you. You indicated that the existing conditions like the ones you described and the challenges it creates for the fire department, these types of conditions do exist around town.
Correct. Yes.
And although I appreciate your testimony that in an optimal situation you might want to improve things, it's a fact, is it not, that the fire department deals with those existing conditions as part of their mission each and every day, correct?
Correct, because they're existing.
Okay.
And we try not to create more of them.
Okay, but they exist and you deal with them.
Correct.
And you deal with them.
No, that's not appropriate. Thank you.
And you deal with them in the course of your normal business in terms of providing fire safety for the town of Fairfield.
Correct, with the restrictions that they impose upon us.
Thank you very much.
Attorney Green?
Mr. Chairman, just by way of a comment, Attorney Fallon seems to be suggesting that code review is some sort of, I can't remember the phrase used earlier.
Sanction.
Sanction. process. As I understand it, it's an informal dialogue with departments to streamline applications. It is not binding, it is not precedential in any way.
It's okay, Attorney Felner. Just
And,
let him finish his sentence, because then I have something to say, and then I think we can wrap this up. Please.
So I don't believe that it creates any precedent or binds this commission in any way based on my review of our zoning regulations 8-32.
Well, if all of those departments had already approved all of this, then there would be no point to us reviewing it in the first place. So, you know, I mean, I view our charge as meaningful and to assess the public health, safety, and welfare based upon the evidence and the arguments and all the authority and everything that you guys are so deftly putting in front of us. And there are experts that have different opinions, and we have to weigh and balance those, make credibility judgments, and all this case law that everybody's talking about contains, you know, lots of different direction from the courts on how we're supposed to go about doing our job. The record speaks for itself. There were comments made, there was a meeting, there were emails, there's been testimony, there's been expert reports, there are pictures, charts and graphs, arrows, circles, and we have to review it all. And we will. See you tomorrow night. Okay?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Adjourned.
Thank you very much. Have a good night and be well.